Just wave at our city. Aha. That is our magic red light. So we will call this meeting to order. It is May 4th. Issaquah City Council meeting. Yes, we will acknowledge. May the 4th be with you. And we are going to open with the Pledge of Allegiance. Please join me. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, we are going to now go in to proclamations. I'm looking out in the audience to see who's currently here. The first proclamation is for dedicated correction officers. Commander Alred, come on up. And whereas the City of Issaquah's dedicated correction officers are essential to our justice system, and whereas much is expected from the men and women who every day supervise offenders in correctional facilities, without whose daily hard work and sacrifice we could not operate. And whereas correction officers are skilled professionals who must act as counselors, communicators, educators, and experts as crisis intervention, and must protect our safety while maintaining their professional demeanor, often in a challenging environment. And whereas correction officers must possess the intuitive sense to resolve conflict and support restorative activities while housing offenders in a humane environment, often to the risk of their own well-being. And whereas all are committed to a common goal, the secure, safe, and humane operation of our jail facility where employees work to reduce future crime and change an individual's criminal behavior. Now, therefore, I, Mark Mullet, Mayor of the City of Issaquah, do hereby proclaim the week of May 3rd to May 9th to be Correction Officers Week in the City of Issaquah, and I invite the community to join me in thanking the city's correction officers for their service and outstanding contributions. So we're going to let you do your comments, and then we'll do the photo.
All right. Well, thank you, Mayor and City Council and citizens and those that are here. Good evening. On behalf of the dedicated men and women who serve in our correctional facility, I am honored to accept this proclamation recognizing National Corrections Officers Week. This occasion invites us to pause and reflect on a work that is often unseen, yet deeply important. Those who serve in corrections carry a quiet and steady responsibility, one that requires vigilance, integrity, and compassion each and every day. At its heart, this work is about people. It is about protecting our communities while also recognizing the worth and potential of everyday individual. It is about creating an environment that is safe, orderly, and humane while allowing space for change, growth, and accountability. Those who serve in this profession do so with a sense of duty and purpose. They strive to act with fairness, to lead by example, and to uphold standards even when the work is difficult and demanding. These are not just professional expectations, they are reflections of character. To those who lead and support recognition, thank you for your acknowledging the value of this work and the individuals who carry it forward. And to our correctional staff, those present and those continuing their duties this evening, please know that your efforts matter. The work you do makes a difference in ways that are not always visible, but are deeply meaningful. Thank you for your commitment, your steadiness, and your service, not only to the city, but to me. Thank you.
Oh, wait, don't run away. Oh, all good. Rabbi, you guys want to come on up? Our next proclamation, whereas Jewish American Heritage Month is celebrated every May to honor the significant contributions and rich history of Jewish Americans to the fabric of our nation. And whereas Jewish Americans have played a vital role in shaping the cultural, economic, scientific, and social landscape of the United States, contributing to the advancement of arts, education, business, medicine, and public service. And whereas the Jewish community in Issaquah has been an integral part of our city's diverse and vibrant culture, bringing with them a deep commitment to family, faith, and community. And whereas while anti-Semitism has been rising at an alarming rate in our country and community, we must let it be known that anti-Semitism has no place in Issaquah nor anywhere in the United States. We must continue to create an environment that fosters mutual understanding of tolerance and respect for everyone. And whereas the celebration of Jewish American History Month provides an opportunity to reflect on the historical struggles and achievements of Jewish Americans and to celebrate the enduring spirit of the Jewish community in Issaquah and beyond. Now, therefore, I, Mark Mullet, Mayor of the City of Issaquah, do hereby proclaim the month of May 2026 to be Jewish American Heritage Month in the City of Issaquah, and urge all community members to join in special observation and celebration of Jewish American heritage.
Thank you, Mayor Mullet. Thank you, City Council. And thank you, community representation here. We, as a Jewish community leader at Issaquah for the last 22 years, under 4 mayors, starting from Mayor Freisinger all the way to Mayor Mullet, we have always felt the welcoming, loving, open-hearted connection with the Jewish community, celebrating the Jewish holidays together, achieving a tremendous feeling of safety that's necessary for the Jewish community, especially in times like this, knowing that the city council, the officers in the Issaquah Police District, everyone always looking out to make sure that the Jewish community feels safe here, feels at home here. And by proclaiming the month of May as the Jewish Heritage Month, it's an invitation to every member of the community to become knowledgeable on the gifts, contributions, all the wonderful things that the Jewish community has given, not just to the community in Issaquah, as far as social services and holiday celebrations, but also as active members in the education systems. And hoping, and God willing, the rest of the community will continue seeing the light that the Jewish people are bringing to this community. And as we celebrate this month, every member of the Jewish community living in Issaquah, reading this proclamation, knowing of this proclamation, feels a lot safer and a lot more at home. So thank you, thank you, thank you.
All right, let's go out here. We can do it. Okay, Commander Neese. Mr. Helms. Whereas in 1962, President Kennedy proclaimed May 15th as National Peace Officers Memorial Day, and the calendar week in which May 15th falls is National Police Week. And whereas the members of the law enforcement agency of the City of Issaquah play an important role in safeguarding the rights and freedoms of our community members, and whereas it is important for Issaquah residents to know and understand the duties and responsibilities of our police department as well as the problems they may face in the line of duty, and whereas that all members of our police department recognize their duty to serve the people by safeguarding life and property, protecting them against violence or disorder, protecting the innocent against deception, and the weak against oppression or intimidation. And whereas the Issaquah Police Department has grown to be a modern and scientific law enforcement agency which increasingly provides a vital public service. Now therefore, I, Mark Mullet, Mayor of the City of Issaquah, do hereby proclaim the week of May 11th to the 17th to be Police Week in the City of Issaquah, and invite the community to join me in thanking the Issaquah Police Department for their outstanding service and contributions to the Issaquah community. Thank you very much. Okay, the mic is yours.
Good evening, everyone. Today, I'd like to take a moment to recognize Police Week, a time dedicated to honoring the courage, service, and sacrifice of law enforcement officers across our nation. Police Week traces its origin back to 1962 when John F. Kennedy signed a proclamation designating May 15th as Police Officers Memorial Day, and the week in which it falls as National Police Week. Since then, communities across the country have come together each year remembering the officers who have lost their lives in the line of duty and to show appreciation for those who continue to serve. This week is important because it reminds us that every badge is a person, someone who has chosen a life of service, often facing danger and uncertainty to keep others safe. It is also a time to support the families who stand behind them, sharing in both the pride and the sacrifice. Here in Issaquah, recognizing Police Week gives us the opportunity to connect as community and express our gratitude to the officers who protect our neighborhoods, respond in times of crisis, and work every day to build trust and safety. So this week, let us pause to remember those we've lost, honor those who serve, and reaffirm our support for the men and women who dedicated their lives to protecting ours. Thank you.
Okay, here's our fourth and final proclamation of the day. Whereas Asian American, Native Hawaiian, and Pacific Islander Heritage Month is an annual celebration that recognizes the historical and cultural contributions of Asian Americans, Native Hawaiians, and Pacific Islanders in creating the American story. And whereas we celebrate the growing diversity of Issaquah, with the second largest race being Asian American residents representing 28% of our population, diversity brings richness, opportunity, and growth. And whereas we acknowledge those contributions of Asian Americans, Native Hawaiians, and Pacific Islanders to our local arts, education, sciences, and to our economic, social, and democratic institutions that strengthen our city. And whereas we admit the past and current hardships for Asian and Pacific Islander Americans and strive to foster inclusion to ensure all people have an equal opportunity to live and prosper. Whereas we come together as a community in a spirit of unity to celebrate the invaluable contributions that enrich our city with Asian and Pacific Islander heritage. Now, therefore, I, Mark Mullet, Mayor of the City of Issaquah, do hereby proclaim May 2026 to be Asian American and Pacific Islander Heritage Month in the City of Issaquah, and I urge the community to join in special observance and celebration of Asian American and Pacific Islander heritage.
Thank you to thank you to Mayor Mark Mullet and the City of Issaquah for this meaningful AAPI month's proclamation. The Circle truly appreciate the City of Issaquah for recognizing and celebrating the rich diversity and contribution of our Asian American and Pacific Islander communities. On behalf of our community, I would also like to warmly invite all of you to our AAPI celebration on May 17 from 2 to 4 p.m. at the Issaquah Community Center. This event will feature cultural performances representing communities from China, India, Pakistan, and Filipinos, Japan, and Pacific Islanders, along with interactive cultural stations highlighting traditions from China, Korea, Japan, India, and Hawaii. We are also excited to launch a Chinese history reflection project in partnership with Issaquah History Museum. During these events, helping to deepen our shared understanding of our local history. We would be honored to have all of you in joining us celebrating cultural community and connection. Thank you again for your support. Thank you.
We're gonna do a photo, but we're gonna get you the certificate later on. The next item of business is audience comments. And for those of you who signed up in advance, you'll be called on first. If you're joining us virtually, you can raise your virtual hand. You can press *3 if you're on the phone. And we will ask people, when you do speak, please state your name and your connection to the city of Issaquah. That could be your home address or your business address or just whatever it is that connects you to Issaquah. And please be respectful. And Madam Clerk, you want to go ahead and call up the first person? We have the sheet coming. And I had Maddie on here first. Is that still right? Oh, Dave, you got in ahead of Maddie. The veteran has outdone you.
Good evening, Council. My name is David Wagoner, and I live at 22529 Southeast 42nd Terrace. That's in Providence Point, and I'm probably the oldest Issaquahite here tonight. I've lived in Issaquah since 1945. Gone for 26 years serving our country. Want to say congratulations to Erica. Erica and I served on a couple of boards together in the city, so it's nice to see you up there. Wow, I'm down to 1 second already.
Time flies when you're having fun.
There we go. This will be the formal invitation for our Memorial Day service, which will be held on the 25th of May. And we're going to change it up a little bit this year. In past years, we've always had that service up at the cemetery. However, as your cemetery board chairman for 12 years, I would always see the damage after we had that service. And I would watch people, and not on purpose, drive over gravestones. We don't want to do that anymore. So we are moving this service to the senior center, thanks to the city for letting us do that. And it'll be 10 o'clock on Monday morning, May 25th. Flintoff's Funeral Home will provide refreshments. The service probably won't last more than 45 minutes. Our illustrious mayor will be our speaker, and we look forward to you coming down. I think parking will be better here downtown than it is up on the hill. We're going to still have volunteers from the community when we set the cemetery up on Saturday morning beginning at 9 o'clock. So I want to say to the city, come on out, enjoy it. Again, Flintoff Funeral Home will have refreshments for us to set up flags and crosses. And takedown will be Monday night at 6 p.m. Need the same help there. Mayor, I want to report that the numbers from flag retirement. Our mayor attended our flag retirement on the 25th, Saturday the 25th. It went from 8 o'clock in the morning till 3 o'clock in the afternoon, and we retired 800 to 1,000 flags just on that Saturday. Thanks to Eastside Fire and Rescue for being up there. That fire was hot. We wanted to make sure the kids were safe. We had an Eagle Scout project, which was completed. 60 scouts trained in proper flag etiquette for disposal, and wonderful camaraderie between the community and Eastside Fire and Rescue. To date, I think we're closer to 10,000 flags that we have disposed of for the city of Issaquah since 2006. That's a lot of flags. And the last thing, tonight, that flag represents 6 new flags that we're presenting to the city of Issaquah. Just so you know, we've lost 13 soldiers, sailors, airmen, and Marines since this Iran war has started. and we don't want to forget them. So between Eastside Fire and Rescue and the city of Issaquah, we on Memorial Day will be flying brand new flags in their honor so that they are not forgotten. That's all I have. Thank you. Hope to see you at Memorial Day.
All right. Thank you very much. And here's a public service announcement. I didn't know this until I became mayor. If you have an old flag at your house outside of the senior center, there is a box. Looks kind of like a mailbox where you can actually put in your old flag. And I will say, being at this event, I saw flags with 48 stars on them, hence flags that were obviously made pre-1959. So there were some old flags that were retired, and it is actually a very effective way to retire flags by bringing them down to the senior center. Madam Clerk, next.
Maddie Coates.
Excellent. Good evening, Mayor Mollett, council members, and city staff. Thank you for the chance to speak today. My name is Maddie Coates, and I live in North Issaquah. I'm the editor of the Issaquah Spotlight, and I'm here to share some exciting details about the future of local news in Issaquah. In 2017, the Issaquah Press shut down after 117 years, leaving behind its legacy as a trusted source of local news coverage. For generations, that paper documented the stories, decisions, celebrations, and challenges that shaped this community and helped residents stay informed and connected. In the years since its closure, Issaquah has become known as a news desert, a place with limited access to consistent, locally focused reporting. As our city has continued to grow and evolve, there's been no dedicated newsroom regularly covering the issues that directly affect daily life in Issaquah. The loss of local news didn't just mean fewer headlines, it meant fewer opportunities for civic engagement, accountability, and shared understanding. We know that communities are strongest when residents have trusted information about what's happening around them. That's why I'm proud to introduce a new chapter of local journalism that's about to begin in Issaquah. The Issaquah Spotlight is a new digital newspaper launching in June 2026. This is an independent, community-led effort to deliver meaningful news and information to the greater Issaquah area. It's entirely free to subscribe. All you need is your email address. Every Friday, subscribers will receive 3 to 5 stories in their inbox detailing the topics that matter most to our community. In surveying residents, we've heard that people want to read about local government, schools, businesses, arts and culture, transportation, history, human interest stories, and of course, a police blotter. Our coverage of Issaquah City Council will focus on breaking down complex issues in a clear, accessible way for residents. This ties into our mission of delivering independent local news that helps Issaquah residents understand their community and feel empowered to participate in civic life. I do want to address some test content that briefly appeared on our live website several weeks ago. We want to set the record straight that what we're building is a serious professional newsroom for Issaquah. Our content is nonpartisan, fact-based, and distinct from existing blogs and opinion-driven content. Our publisher, Adam Pinksky, started building the foundation for the Issaquah Spotlight almost exactly 1 year ago. As a 30-year subscriber to the Issaquah Press, he missed having a local source of news coverage in the greater Issaquah area. In the early days, Adam partnered with a group of volunteers to research similar startups across the country and better understand what makes community journalism successful today. With support from the Issaquah Kiwanis Club, he hosted community input meetings to gather feedback on what residents value in local news and what they felt was missing. Ultimately, community members voted to select the Issaquah Spotlight as the name of this publication last fall. Since then, we've hired a reporter and editor, established a board of directors, many of whom are sitting behind me, launched our website, and built a clear financial plan. Our team has submitted an application to the IRS to become a 501c3 nonprofit, and until that's approved, we're fiscally sponsored by the Issaquah Kiwanis Club. We rely on donations, grant funding, and sponsorships to succeed. Over the next month, we've scheduled 3 public community meetings to hear feedback from Issaquah residents. Our first meeting is Thursday, May 21st at Blakely Hall. Our second one is online via Google Meet on Wednesday, May 27th. And our third one is on Tuesday, June 2nd at the KCLS Service Center. And each meeting is from 8 7 to 8 p.m. We encourage you all to attend. And this will be an opportunity to meet our team, share story ideas, ask questions, and learn how to subscribe and support our launch. We ask that you all continue spreading the word about this fresh era of news in Issaquah. Please subscribe and encourage your networks to do the same. More information you can find at issaquahspotlight.org. And I welcome the opportunity to meet with each of you before our launch to share more details about our coverage strategy. Thank you for listening.
Thank you very much. I was with Adam at Timber Ridge today, and we had Timber Ridge all excited about an online newspaper coming back. And Kashif, you get the award for Best Sneaker Game at the May 4th Council meeting. It's very impressive, the purple sneakers. Madam Clerk, next.
John Perizek.
Mayor, Council, thank you for having me tonight. My name's John Prezik. I'm the General Manager of the Hilton Garden Inn at 1800 Northwest Gilman, as well as I'm the Board Chair for Visit Issaquah. I'm here today to talk about just tourism in the city, as well as the annual report you receive for Visit Issaquah. I do urge that you spend some time to read it. It was a very good report of what we've done last year, and with Christy and Kimberly in their positions, they have moved Issaquah as a tourist destination so much. With the Destination Stewardship Project gathering local companies together that didn't realize that they were a part of tourism. One of the things we love about Issaquah is, you know, the restaurants, the shops, Gilman Village, Front Street, the high school, everything is related to tourists, not just the hotels. Tourism is based on people wanting to have fun experiences, and Issaquah is here for that. Also, there's a few fun things coming up with tourism. Last year, we were able to do a feasibility study for the upcoming Aircraft Paragliding Festival, which will be the first in the U.S. It's based off of one in France and has never occurred in the U.S. before, and we're very excited for that to happen. Other thing that I just want to mention is if anyone ever has questions about what Visit Issaquah is doing, what we're doing with tourism, how we're growing the city, making money, feel free to reach out. We're always here. We love talking about just what is happening, what we're doing. It's a lot of fun for those who've not worked in a hotel. We bounce around, we're bartending, we're cleaning rooms, we're at the desk, we're all over the place at the council meetings. We really enjoy being out and talking to people. That's what we do. So I thank you for your quick time. Reach out if you guys ever have any questions, and do please read that report because it'll answer everything you need.
Excellent. Thank you very much, John. I will be starting that aircraft festival landing on a paraglider on August 15th at 1 o'clock. Yes. Could be the end of my mayor term. Okay, Madam Clerk?
The next speaker is a virtual attendee, Joe Kunzler. Joe, we're going to make you a panelist now. You should then see the option to unmute and can choose to turn your video on.
Hello, can everyone hear me?
Yes.
Thank you, clerk. Thank you, staff, for getting the technical issues worked out so we could have some virtual public comment tonight, some moral support for Issaquah as you go for your Sound Transit Link competition. Huge supporter of this community winning over Kirkland for several reasons. Number one, you actually proclaimed Jewish American Heritage Month. That's important. Number two, you, unlike Kirkland, are going to deal with the threat of Alex Zimmerman and other anti-Semites coming and hurling hate and drawing a line in the sand. That is very much appreciated. Not looking forward to the conversation with Kirkland tomorrow night. I'll leave it at that because they haven't done the work that Redmond's done, Bellevue's done, 12 Issaquah's done. And number three, I'm really excited for Thursday morning where we can make our case for the right communities that accept Sound Transit values such as inclusion and integrity and community and environmentalism and accountability to be placed ahead and complete these projects, because Sound Transit isn't just a mass transit provider, it's also a community builder. And when you lay light rail down somewhere, you are making a statement that is where, when you put a light rail and stations together, you're making a statement that is where community is, that is where community matters, and I am rooting for you 110% as much as Everett and the Great North, and at some point Tacoma. And I just want you to know you've got support out there, and I know Thursday's going to be a tough day. We're still waiting on Sound Transit to drop the draft resolution on that. I'm refreshing the Sound Transit website, and like you all probably are, and just hoping for the best possible outcome out of all of this so we can build back better from the past few years. Want to thank you all for your public service, and go get them. Go 12 Issaquah. Thank you.
Thank you, Joe. We like the Seahawk encouragement. This is awesome. Madam Clerk,
No one else has signed up in advance to speak.
is there anybody else in the audience? This is your chance. Raise your hand. All right, come on up.
Good evening. My name is Atharv Kamaria. I am 13 years old, and even though I don't live in Issaquah, I live in Sammamish. I want to start by telling you something personal. I have a congenital heart condition. It was never life-threatening, but I know what it feels like to be a kid going through something. Something that feels bigger than you. Something that makes the world feel heavy and uncertain and hard to navigate alone. And I looked around and I thought, there are so many kids going through something hard. Not just kids in hospitals, kids dealing with loss, kids going through a family divorce, kids carrying weight that no child should ever have to carry alone. Nobody was asking those kids what they imagined. Nobody was asking them what they dreamed about. Nobody was asking them what they would create if they could create anything. That silence is what started Printable Dreams. Printable Dreams is a nonprofit I founded that turns children's drawings into real 3D printed objects. A kid draws something, a dragon, a rocket, a garden creature, a superhero, anything their imagination can conjure up, and we bring it to life as something they can actually hold in their hands. Something that is entirely, completely, uniquely theirs. Every single print is made specifically for that child. No two are ever the same. Printable Dreams is not just for sick children. It is for every child going through something hard. Every child deserves a moment where the world stops feeling heavy, where their imagination becomes something real and joyful that belongs entirely to them. I believe that when a child holds an object made from their own imagination, something shifts inside them. It tells them that their dreams are real, that their ideas have power, that even in the hardest, darkest moments of their young lives, their creativity belongs to them, and nobody can take that away. I've seen what happens when a child realizes their imagination can become something tangible. Their eyes change, their posture changes, something in them wakes up. That moment, that one single moment, is worth everything. I am funding this entirely myself. From June to October of last summer, I spent every weekend helping an elderly vendor at the Redmond Farmers Market sell her products. Week after week I showed up. I stayed the entire day, every time. I earned $300. That $300 is what is backing Printable Dreams today. Not my parents, not a loan, not a donation. Months of work I did with my own two hands. Because I believed in this before anyone else did. My teacher at my school, Inglewood Middle School, Mr. Henderson, has been gracious enough to let me use the school's 3D printer with my own filament. I have a mission. I have my teacher's support. I have my parents' support. I have a website, and I bought the raw material from the money I earned. Here is my dream. I do not want Printable Dreams to stay in Sammamish or even in Washington. I want to build a global network of 3D printing volunteers. People all around the world who sign up, and when a child anywhere in a hospital in Seattle, or a clinic in rural Kenya, or a children's ward in Tokyo sends in a drawing, I match them with a volunteer nearby who can print it and deliver it directly to them. Free. Always free. Because this will never be about money. This is always about making a child feel seen. I'm asking tonight for your support, your connections, and your help in growing Printable Dreams into something that reaches every child on this planet who needs a moment of joy. Because every child deserves to see their imagination become real. If you want to learn more, my website is printabledreams.com. Thank you.
That was really impressive.
Thank you.
I think you get the award for most profound 13-year-old testimony of 2026. And I think we're all glad that at least there's one election cycle where we could run for office and beat all of us. So, anybody else wishing to testify? No audience comments? Okay, we are now going to end audience comments, and the next item of business is the consent calendar. I do not have any remarks on the consent calendar items. Committee chairs or chair designees, any reports on consent calendar items? Looking, not seeing any. I think, Madam Clerk, you might have a minor update.
Yes, I just wanted to let everyone know, per your policy, that there was a correction made to the April 27th meeting minutes. That was circulated to you a few hours ago. It was just better clarifying the location of an item of discussion at last Monday's special meeting. With approval of the consent calendar, you'll be approving the revised version.
Okay, so the consent calendar was distributed to the council in advance. If authorized, consent calendar will be considered together and approved in one motion. Have the payables and payrolls been reviewed?
They have.
That is affirmative. Does any council member want to remove any items from the consent calendar and place them in regular business? Not seeing any. Is there a motion?
Mr. Mayor, I move the consent calendar as listed in today's packet.
Second.
There's been a motion and a second. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, nay. And that passes unanimously. The next item of business is regular business, ID 2018 informational update on the Q4 2025 year-end report. I think we have Kristen Garcia coming up to present this item.
Yes, thank you, Mayor. Give me just a moment to get my screen. Okay, let's see. Okay, you can. All right. Thank you, Mayor. Good evening, members of council. And for those members of the audience here tonight and maybe viewing online, I'm Kristen Garcia, the Finance Director here, and here to give a 2025 year-end financial update. I do want to take a moment to thank council for all the questions that were received on this report. It's helping to inform me and our new budget manager of some of the information that you're interested in, the level of detail that you're looking for. And so that'll help inform and direct on future reports. So thank you for providing that feedback. I've also been trying to expand the information that's been presented to council so you have a more holistic view of all city finances. I know historically we've tended to focus on the general fund, what we call the big four revenues, and the REIT funds. And so hopefully the expansion of the information I'll share will be helpful as you move forward with some of your decision making. And the last item that I want to note before I get started with the presentation is that we do have a new budget manager. His name is Michael Blunt, and you will all get the opportunity to meet him as he's been invited to attend our council retreat this Saturday.
Michael's from Goodyear, so our icebreaker is going to be who's seen the Goodyear blimp, and you'll have to share Goodyear blimp stories.
Yes, that was a fun exercise. All right, so the purpose of tonight is intended to provide City Council with an overview of the preliminary unaudited 2025 year-end financial results. I do want to make note that the amounts in the document are subject to change pending final review, internal review of the financial statements, and then, of course, pending final outcome of the audit. I don't expect there to be any changes, but the CPA and me wants to make full disclosure that if there are any changes, I do expect they would be very minor and not material. So the general fund started 2025 with fund balance of 17 million, 48% of which was restricted and related to the affordable housing sales tax. I do want to note that beginning in 2026, the city did create the affordable housing sales tax. We have moved all of the restricted fund balance out of the general fund into the new fund. So now going forward, all revenues and expenses will be accounted for in that fund. So that should eliminate or significantly reduce the amount of restricted monies reported in the general fund. I want to note that the city also received $9.6 million from the sale of the capital assets of the City Hall Northwest and the food bank, and this is a one-time source of income, so that's why it was noted separately in the report and removed from fund balance calculations. The total ending unrestricted fund balance at the end of 2025 was $8.1 million, or 12% of total unrestricted expenditures. Reminder that city financial policy requires unrestricted fund balances to be between 15 and 20% of unrestricted expenditures. And if you might recall, during the mid-biennium process last fall, we were targeting to hit, the forecast was targeting to hit about 10% at the end of 2025 and 12% by the end of 2026. So we're actually ahead of where we forecasted last fall. The city has four main revenue sources in the general fund: property tax, sales tax, business and occupation tax, and utility tax. We historically have referred to these as the big four revenue, so if you hear that term, that's typically what we're referring to. Collectively, these four revenue sources comprise about 69% of all general fund revenue. And this chart is comparing the 2025 budget to Q3 2025 forecast and then year-end actuals. Property tax revenues came in at about $10.8 million, both aligned with budget and forecast. Sales tax revenues at year-end were aligned with budget, both at $20 million, but the forecast was indicating that we would come in a bit higher at about $21 million. We looked back at the forecasting model, and the historical forecasting methodology was based on an average percentage of total revenue rather than the change from year to year. So I think that's what be driving the higher forecast. So the new budget manager and I are going to take a look at our forecasting models for 2026 just to see if any adjustments might need to be made and to make sure that we're trying to forecast as accurately as we can. B&O taxes, those are a little bit harder to predict. Our actuals came in about $7.5 million versus $6.75 million for budget. Actuals, though, were actually within about 45% or 46,000 of what we forecasted. So that actual and forecast was a little bit closer. I did notice in the last couple of years, the budget has been quite a bit lower for B&O tax. So that's something that I want to take a look at as we begin developing our 27-28 budget.
And Kristen, I'm going to go ahead and I'll do
Yeah.
questions as you go. So Council President Marks.
Yes.
Thanks. So we're going to, there's information in this packet. I'm confused about these numbers a little bit because there's information in the packet that says for revenue, general fund, 2025 revised 67 million, 2025 actuals 79 million, over under 12.4 million. So how do those numbers relate to the numbers on this slide?
So you're referring to probably
It's on
this chart?
Yeah, there we go.
Yeah, so the 12 million, 9.6 of that was the sale of City Hall Northwest, and then 3 million of that was from other changes related to, let's see, I have that in there. We have investment interest, park rentals and recreation classes, B&O taxes I just talked about, plan check fees, so other miscellaneous, but the $12 million difference, 9.6 was from the sale of City Hall Northwest.
I see. Okay. So okay. It wasn't obvious why they would be different.
Why that didn't connect. So
no, just why they would be different, but okay. All right, thank you.
Okay. And then as for utility taxes, the budget of $8.3 million was projected a little bit too high. We looked at the projections for the incremental tax increase that would have been received when we increased the tax rate. So the change in the utility tax rate was overestimated. So the forecast was also affected by that. And that's something else that we'll need to address as we look at the 27 and 28 budget, is that I think historically, because of that change, we've been budgeting a little bit too high. So we want to bring that into an alignment. Okay, so this chart is referring just very high level at the general fund, the utility funds, kind of rolling in a high level view of all the city funds. Total revenue collections across all city funds for the city were about $181 million. As I mentioned, the general fund The variance is 12.3 million. 9.6 of that was the revenue from the sale of City Hall Northwest and the food bank. And then other items that contributed to that, I just mentioned investment interest, park rentals, recreation class B&O tax, and plan check fees. That list is not all comprehensive, but those were some of the big variances that contributed to that. Water and sewer revenues came in over budget because of user charges. There was a rate increase per the ordinance that affected 2025 rates, so that impacted revenue. And we did have a slight increase in the number of customers being billed, so that would also contribute to the increase in revenue. Storm revenues came in under budget. That was because of the Laughing Jacobs Creek project. So I'll talk a little bit in a few slides, but the enterprise funds do account for both operating and capital revenue expenditures. And so it's not just user charges, any capital grants or connection fees would be included in that. So I wanted to point that out. We did budget in the storm fund to receive a grant of about $995,000 related to that Laughing Jacobs Creek project. But we had very little expenses related to that, so we didn't seek reimbursement, so we wouldn't have had revenue to compare against the budget. REIT came in over budget because of the sale of the Anthology Apartments. That was a very large transaction, quite an anomaly, not something that we typically see, so that drove the revenues up and came in quite a bit over budget. Mitigation revenues also came in higher than budget. We received about $600,000 more in traffic impact fees, about $148,000 more in bike pedestrian impact fees, and about $117,000 more in fire impact fees. The other category is kind of a combination of all the other city funds rolled in together. The biggest piece of that, about half, is the capital projects fund. We also have other funds, internal service funds, the debt service fund, the other special revenue funds like school zone safety, lodging tax, and cemetery. But the biggest difference, the $5 million variance, is related to the capital project funds. And that's really related to the timing between grants. So in the capital project fund, that doesn't generate its own revenue. Revenues typically come from transfers from other funds like mitigation or REIT or the TBD fund or grant funding. Sometimes the timing between when we plan for a project and when the project occurs, sometimes that timing is shifted, or when we might expect to see the revenue because they're typically reimbursement based. So the biggest difference is, as an example, we have a project TRO 96, the Northwest Sammamish Road project. We budgeted about $3.1 million to receive for that project. But as of year end, we only received about $4,000. That's probably because we haven't expended enough to seek reimbursement. So that would be an example of why that variance would be so big. Okay, total general fund expenditures came within about $500,000 of budgeted expenditures. Police and parks are the largest departments in terms of budget. In the undefined category, the biggest piece of that is the East Side Fire and Rescue Services. And then the next largest category within undefined would be transfers out. That would primarily be the general fund support, the transfers to the street operating fund. There were some departments that had overspends, some that had underspends, but a reminder that we budget at the fund level, and 2025 is year one in the biennium, so this is kind of our mid-biennium checkpoint, and we look at expenditures between 25 and 26. So overall, for biennial budgeting purposes, expenditures coming within $500,000 is pretty aligned with budget, so no concerns there.
Council President Martz.
Thank you. So at the highest level, so setting aside the sale of City Hall Northwest, I think what you said was that we exceeded our budget for revenues, right, by something like $3 million?
Mm-hmm.
And you said our expenditures were within $500,000 of budget. So why did our ending fund go down? I would have thought that our ending fund would have been up by something like $2.5 million. And part of this is because we don't have line item on expenditures the way we do on revenues.
Right. So we have.
Plus 3 million minus 500,000 is plus 2.5 million, right? What am I missing?
Well, you're looking at actuals. I'm comparing budget to budget. So our actuals, our beginning fund balance was 17 million, and then our ending fund balance was 17 million, so that's actual to actual. So we actually increased our fund balance.
I'm sorry, we increased our fund balance by how much?
By 800,000. But that was total restricted and unrestricted. See, that's one of the complications of when we're commingling restricted and unrestricted. So if we look at unrestricted, let me move my screen here.
I'm just trying to understand, it seems like we had a good year for revenues. And if we towed the line on expenditures, why didn't we have a good year in ending fund, as big of a good year? If we were really like plus 3 million.
I would have to dig into that more because I guess I'm not
'cause
quite
that's the big question, right?
I guess I'm not understanding because I'm showing that fund balance did increase. So,
but if it increased by 800,000, you showed that our actuals in 2025 were 12.4 million over, and you said roughly 9 of that was the sale of City Hall Northwest.
right.
Right, so that should mean 3.5 million, right? We overperformed on revenue by about $3.5 million, right?
And then we overexpended as well.
By about 500,000. 3.4 minus 500,000 is not 800,000. But again, because we're not seeing the expenditure numbers, it's hard for me to guess. But
Yeah.
I'm just trying to understand. It seemed like we had a good year on revenue, and if we held the line on expenditures, we should have had a really good year on ending fund balance. Is that wrong?
That's not wrong. I'll need to look into it a little bit more detail. I think you want to see the line item detail, so I think it's better
I want
if
to see the big picture, right? If
Yeah.
the big picture to the community is we did better than expected on revenues, I would hope we would do better than expected on ending fund balance. If we held the line on expenditures. If you told me that, expenditures were also 3.5 million high, then I would understand why the ending fund balance was, within the margin of error, the same as before, but that's not what I think that you're saying. It's really the big picture on revenues versus expenditure on the general fund, right?
Which I
'Cause
think
that's
is
the
what
bit that we have control
which is
over.
what I think I'm providing, but happy to have an offline conversation so I can continue the presentation and dig into the information a little bit further for you.
I think starting with having line item on expenditures the way we have on revenues would be a good start.
Okay, that sounds great.
Well, in the very bottom of the general fund balance slide, because it's 15.3 million 2025 Q3 forecast, and then 2025 actuals end up being the 17.8, so it lines up. I don't know, but I understand kind of what you're saying, but that's the only point on this chart. So Deputy President Jang and then Councilmember Walsh.
Yeah, I was going to ask, so my understanding is the last 2 lines on here relate to the total ending fund balance, and then is the increase in revenues by 3.6 million, was that between the Q3 forecast versus the actuals essentially?
That was between budget to actual, I believe.
Okay. Because I guess I am slightly okay, anyway, whatever. We don't need to dwell on this point for too long now, but it does seem like there's a pretty big gap between the Q3 forecast versus actuals on unrestricted ending fund balance, which is
So if
positive.
you look at this chart that's on the screen, that's comparing the 2025 revised budgetary numbers to 2025 actuals. So that was the 12 million. So 9.6 of that was the sale of City Hall Northwest, and then the rest was those miscellaneous items that I talked about. So that was comparing revised budget to actuals.
Okay, that makes sense. Then I think on this slide, the difference between Q3 forecast and actuals is, at least in the same ballpark as on slide 5.
Yeah.
Councilmember Walsh.
Yeah, I was just going to follow up on what I was hearing from Council President Martz. Where is that 500,000 coming from? Because when I read slide 3, if you'll go back to it, the difference between unrestricted expenditures, that 66.359 million on the budget, and the 68.036 on the actuals is actually almost 1.7 million. So I'm not sure where the 500,000 500,000 came from. Maybe it was another part of the document, but at least if I'm looking at, the revenue was up 2.6 million between budget and actuals there on unrestricted, ignoring the sale of capital assets. And the expenditures is up 1.7 million. So if I'm reading that correctly, then I want to take on your question, which is, why were our expenditures $1.7 million over budget on unrestricted funds?
So you're comparing.
I'm comparing the budget of 66.4 million.
Yes. Okay. I think.
And the actuals.
Yes. So I think I see where the confusion is coming from. So this, make sure you can see. So this column right here was the original budget, and I thought this could cause some confusion, so that's my apologies. So this is the 2025 original budget. We used the original budget because we didn't have a breakdown of restricted and unrestricted, but in this other section right here, we're actually comparing the modified budget. So we actually modified the budget, so that's why the budget to actuals were a little bit closer. So I think I need to provide that detail. So
yes,
my apologies.
That is request.
I caused that confusion. So the charts, the budget columns aren't apples to apples, if that makes sense. We started the first piece with comparing original budget, original forecast, and then went into modified because we didn't have the original breakdown.
So would it be safe to say that while the difference between the original 2025 budget and 2025 actuals for unrestricted expenditures is large, some portion of that is expenditures that we approved during the biennium?
That is correct.
Okay, yes. I would like to understand what those were compared to how did we overspend to our modified budget?
We overspent by the 500,000.
That's the difference.
Yes.
So do you get that, Council President Martz? She was just explaining the 500,000. Yeah.
We're using some different terms here. This Q3. Sometimes we say Q3. Sometimes we say revised. I'm choking over the terminology. I think what I am hearing is that all I care about at the end of the day is when the voters and our residents stop. If somebody stops me on the street and they say, "How are we doing? Are we spending like we said we were going to spend? And are we matching that to the revenues? Are we being good stewards of their money?" What I look for in these reports is the ability to answer that question. So the extent to which we blow out expenditures or blow out revenues is the bit that I want to understand. So this is a helpful conversation, and I will go back and watch this video again to make sure that I understand. I think the answer is that our expenditures compared to original budget were on the order of increased to the extent that revenues increased. And so that's why the ending fund balance doesn't change as much as we thought it would. So thank you for your help, and thank you for your help.
And we have 90 minutes on May 9th to this topic.
Thank you. Yes. Well, no, this is very helpful for me to understand, terminology. I know we do use things interchangeably, so it helps provide more clarity for me. So my apologies if I caused any confusion, but I have a better understanding going forward on how to better meet your needs. So hopefully it'll be better next time. Okay, I think we left off with going into the enterprise funds, and I think this is something maybe newer that we haven't seen before. I believe maybe quarter 2 or quarter 3, we might have kind of dipped our toe a little bit into the enterprise funds, but again, this is just a high-level, broad brush overview. What this chart was trying to indicate. So I guess I should stop. So I should stop just to make sure everyone understands. So the city has enterprise funds, which are comprised of water, sewer, and stormwater revenues. Those funds are a little bit unique in that they do account for all operating revenue, operating expenses, and capital revenue and capital expenses, unlike some other funds. And so the next three charts are going to show the inflows and the outflows of those funds, again, which include both operating and capital. And I did want to note, I mentioned it in the memo, that the enterprise funds are designed to be self-supporting and structurally balanced, in that over the long term, the rate should be set to generate enough revenue to cover both the operating and capital. What that also means is that I have an expectation that fund balance may go up as we're accumulating revenue, because we might be saving money to pay for a future project, but then fund balance might go down because now we've planned for that big project that we've been saving for. So I think the question came up in the report, so I did kind of want to explain that just because you see a dip in fund balance does not mean that there's a structural fund balance. The funds are structured to operate that way. So in the case of the water fund, the overall revenues were more than expenditures, and so in this case, that added to the ending fund balance. In the case of the sewer fund, the total expenditures exceeded total revenue. So here's where you're going to see that the fund balance actually went down, but it was used for capital outlay. But if you look at the ending sewer fund balance, it's still about 1 million more than what the sewer revenues generated. So in 2025, as an example, there was total expenditures, which included the Newport Sewer Relocation Project, and that project cost was about 4.8 million. So again, that's why you would see a reduction in fund balance. And then the fund balance for stormwater, it increased just slightly. There wasn't any major fluctuations or any additional items that I needed to talk about there. But again, based on feedback that I'm hearing and in future reports, I think it might be helpful. We can also provide a more of a breakdown for this, because it's hard to see kind of how the utility funds are operationally functioning because of the commingling between the operating and capital. So if council would like, in future reports, we can provide a better breakdown for those funds as well, so you can kind of better understand how revenues are performing on the operations side. So in summary, again, just a reminder, this is year one of the biennium, so this is kind of a mid-checkpoint. Generally, I would say revenues are steady with moderate growth, and from my perspective, the financial results are generally aligned with forecast and budget, and I don't have any major concerns with how we're performing financially at this point. And then our next steps will be to bring forward a Q1 2026 update.
Council President Martz.
Did it surprise us that our revenues turned out fine? Because I feel like we've had a lot of conversations where, like, grim tidings are coming, and we need to tighten our belts, and we need to be careful. And we are always careful, but this feels like maybe revenues did better than we had been fretting for the last 6 months. Is that true?
I would say that is true. However, I would also say that based on what things are happening nationally or even statewide indications, I think we were accurate in taking a pause and evaluating where things were to understand how things would be happening locally. So while I'm pleasantly surprised to see that we did outperform, I still think there's things out there that I'm seeing at the state level and nationally that we still should be in a period of caution, not overreaction.
So too soon for a giant disco party, is what you're saying?
Correct.
Okay.
Yes.
Thank you.
Councilmember Adair.
This is probably kind of outside the scope of this, but a number I've been after is after the millionaire tax with the decrease in sales tax that's going to hit cities. Is any number that we have yet to assess what Issaquah's feeling of that is? Because obviously sales tax was the biggest bit of revenue in our column here, and I know that it's still a couple years away, but like some idea of what that's going to be.
I just speak very. So I can tell you we did see a small uptick when the new taxable services did come online. It wasn't significant to maybe change our whole financial picture. But I imagine now that the millionaire tax, with the changes in that, we'll see that reduction again. But again, it was only 1 month, so I can't give you any kind of a trend or an estimation, but I can just tell you we did see a slight uptick. I'm fairly certain it was attributable to that taxable change.
Well, and I think Councilmember Adair would say at the AWC Legislative Affairs Committee last Friday, I think we heard from the legislators who were there that, yes, this sales tax like on IT services, which is like I think one of the things that Starbucks is now shifting their IT to Nashville so they don't have to pay sales tax on their IT services. They made it very clear that that is going away at some point. So we're all going to get this small kind of lift in sales tax from that. But I think in the back of the envelope guess for us, I think on diapers, over-the-counter medicine, like hygiene products, we're probably losing, a few $100,000, I think, in sales tax from that will go away. But right now, those haven't gone away yet, but we are getting additional sales tax revenue from service sales tax. But like I said, I think the backfill we're going to be asking from the legislature is for the ones that we expect to stay around, and they made it very clear they're not going to backfill the IT sales tax. We should treat it as kind of one-time revenue that we shouldn't expect to be ongoing, because they're saying after 2028, assume it's going away. So I think they're trying to manage city expectations that the short-term sales tax from the service expansion is not something we should be relying on, and we should treat it as one-time revenue. So that'll be our challenge, I think, as we prepare the 2-year budget, is to do exactly that and try to strip out that sales tax on service expansion.
Okay, that concludes my presentation.
Councilmember Walsh.
Other questions?
Thank you. Are we ready for feedback or just, yeah? Okay, great. I did find the whatever inflows, outflows charts that you provided for enterprise really useful. I would like to see those, as you said, for operation versus capital, just to have an understanding that, that will show the picture of we're saving for certain capital pieces, but we're covering all of our operations needs.
Yes.
I would love to be able to create that story for our general fund and be able to really understand. I think we've had a hard time telling the story and creating a visual picture of what our general fund health is and what the inflows and the outflows are compared to expectation. And so I think that type of picture, if it's possible, could be a useful way to show, look, this is the the fund balances, this is the revenue, this is the expenditures, and the result. Because another piece that I think we're all cognizant of is trying to understand that we are growing that fund balance, because we recognize that the 10% we thought we were going to be at and the 12% that you're now saying we're at is not where we want to be. And so being able to show that we were able to grow that is really important. I think also recognizing that maybe telling a story over the last few years of some of the mid-budget cycle additions that we've had, what percentage of our expenditures that is, how are we trending on that, so that maybe we can utilize that to create a little bit of fiscal restraint during the mid-biennium, so that, because it's very easy to say yes to something that's presented to us as a need when it's a one-off.
Right.
But when I have to balance it against our staff members and whether or not in a budget cycle we are going to be cutting staff, that is much harder. And so recognizing when we make these changes what the impact is to our overall budget, I think would be a really good story for us to have in our back pockets as we are presented with those opportunities.
Okay,
So,
yeah,
thank you.
That's great feedback, thank you.
Councilmember Boyd.
Why is B&O tax, I think you mentioned earlier, it's like kind of harder to plan around?
Because that's based on businesses' revenue, and so we're really not privy to that level of detail on how an individual business is performing, other than when we get the tax return. So we can really just rely on trends and the best we can kind of pay attention again to the local economy to see if we're, sensing that a particular business might be struggling or performing really well. But that's why it's, we're not privy to that level of detail on how individual businesses are performing. So. Does that answer?
And I think, Kristen, too, in the B&O tax, we felt like some of the forecasts were just deviating from actuals in a way, where I think going forward, we're going to try to make sure the B&O forecast lines up really closely to what we've actually been getting. And so I think we had some forecasts.
Correct. Yeah.
And that's this is forecast, I think, coming from pre-Kristen. So I think going forward, I think our goal is to have forecasts that we think are going to be more accurate what the actual B&O revenue has been.
Correct. Thank you.
Okay. I think you're off the hook.
Okay. Thank
Like
you
I said,
so much.
May 9th, we get this times 3. We get 90 minutes of, okay, so next, ID 2001, Public Records and Open Public Meetings Act training. I did make a request to have this as a committee of the whole item. I was told that I too need said training. And so that was not an option. And here we are. Rachel.
Sorry, we'll try to make it as painless as
Make it
possible.
spicy. Yeah, you got to spice up our training here.
All right, good evening, everyone. Rachel Bender-Turpin. I am here to talk to you about the PRA and the Open Public Meetings Act. Sorry, just a second. I lost it on my screen here.
And you can ask questions as we go. It'll keep us engaged.
All right, so we're going to start by, a little overview of the evening. We're going to talk about, surprise, surprise, the Public Records Act and the OPMA. And we're going to have a special emphasis on social media because I understand that the council rules of procedure are before the council this evening as well, including a social media component. So this is very timely and topical. Sorry, getting used to the remote. So what's the PRA and why should you care? The Public Records Act is it's the Washington State Sunshine Act, essentially. It's a strongly worded mandate for broad disclosure of public records and access to public records, which is essentially in the interest of keeping government open and transparent. It requires agencies to make records available for inspection and copying to anyone who requests, and it also requires that we, retain said records in conjunction with other separate local government retention schedules that set how long those we have to keep those. It's important because, first of all, you all have to have this training. It's required by statute. So by law, you have to learn about these things. But also, Public Records Act violations, they can be really expensive. And so it's good for everyone to know a little bit about the Public Records Act so that not only we can comply with it, but we can, understand how important it is to comply so we can avoid lawsuits. The definition of public record is very broad. It includes any writing that contains information relating to the conduct of government or the performance of government that is prepared, owned, used, retained by the government agency. And it's regardless of the physical form or characteristics. So essentially, they define writing to be very broad to include pictures, audio recordings, basically any type of record. Writing is not just written words, let's put it that way. Maps, anything like that. It includes emails and other digital documents. It also includes any paper files. It includes recordings, your web content. It also includes public records that are created in your personal accounts or on your personal equipment. So that's an important thing for us to think about and discuss this evening because there are challenges with that. And it may also include social media posts, which we'll talk about more. I've already kind of talked about this, but these are some examples of public records. It includes things like draft documents. It includes phone logs for, any sort of city cell phone and potentially maybe even personal phone logs to the extent you're using personal phones for city business. That's kind of a gray area one. Voicemails, text messages, and it can also include social media posts, but also the comments that are made on posts, either on a council member's post or on someone else's post, depending on the circumstances and what exactly is said. Location and format don't matter, so that's kind of the most important thing. Now we'll talk about some, Tisha, you're going to take it.
Before you go on, just that piece there, you've listed, potentially notes or anything like that. Can you talk about the difference between something that gets typed up but doesn't get saved versus otherwise? Because I know there's just this, if something is a temporary piece and gets immediately gotten rid of?
Yes, great question. So yes, if a document is transitory, then it doesn't generally have any retention value and it can be disposed of as soon as it's no longer needed. So often folks maybe just write themselves little notes during a meeting or something to just sort of, keep track of things. If that document truly doesn't require any sort of retention, and you'd have to look at the retention schedule to see what the retention was for that particular document, then yes, you could get rid of it legally under the retention schedule. However, to the extent you didn't, let's say you had it, you would have to provide it in a public records request response if you had it. So that's that's actually one that I had it come up with a different client earlier last week. There was confusion about a document that didn't have any retention value. It was actually browser information, browser history for various users. And yes, that can, there is no real retention for that. You just need to keep it as long as the agency needs it. And so if you don't need it, it can be, gotten rid of. But the request came in before any of that had been deleted, so you have to give it all up. So that's kind of how that works.
Council President Martz.
So I have a confusion.
Yeah.
So text messages.
Yes.
I assume, obviously, like text messages between me and fellow council members. Text messages between me and my son-in-law? Like what constitutes?
Depends. I mean, if they're about city business, we'll get a little bit more into that when we talk about social, the idea of it being created. It has to be created sort of to further the interests of government. It has to relate to the conduct of government. But if you are actually, it doesn't matter if you're talking to a member of the public or a council member. If it is about city business and you're sending it in your capacity as a council member, then it is probably a public record.
So my son-in-law, who lives in New York City, is a trolley aficionado and has asked me about the trolley and getting the trolley back up. That's potentially a discoverable record with my son-in-law about the trolley?
Potentially. It depends, I think, on exactly what the messages say.
All right. Thank you.
All right. So now we're going to talk about some local government responsibilities and challenges under the Public Records Act. So the agency has a lot of lawful, statutorily mandated requirements. We have to adopt and publish a PRA policy, which Issaquah has done. We have to appoint and publicly identify our public records officer. This is our city clerk. And we have to ensure that the public records officer, as well as all of the members of the governing body, complete PRA training, which you are doing this evening. We also have to publish and maintain a list of exemptions that are outside the PRA. That one's tough because they kind of change all the time, but we try to do the best we can. We have to maintain a public records index, and we also have to adopt some sort of fee schedule, at least if we want to be able to charge fees. And then we have also additional statutory requirements to track and log and report on our public records request information.
Councilmember Boyd.
Yes. This training, how often is there a recurrence? Is it like this is just it, no matter if I'm on?
Every 4 years.
Okay.
Yeah, you don't have to, it's not annual, thankfully, so. And then, of course, we have to keep them for as long as the retention schedule says we have to keep them.
Can we set the fee schedule, or is that, it's in statute as well?
We can set the fee schedule, but within parameters that are included in the statutes. So we had to do like a kind of a study in order to charge fees that are different than what the standard statutory fees are. Challenges that the agency often faces, and keeping up with technology. It's hard to find ways to capture and retain that are public records that are created on new platforms. So, anytime, COVID, posed one example. We had to move to a lot of online platforms for a while, and we had to figure out how we keep all these records and what we need to keep of these various meetings and things like that. Some apps are easier to capture the data from than others. We have to keep up with the volume of records, and in particular, the volume of digital records. Email in particular is really challenging because people send emails all the time, all day long, and it's not only time consuming for us to have to search all the emails when we get a public records request, but it's also just expensive to store all of those records. So the city actually has implementing new procedures for deleting records so that we're not just holding all emails in our server forever indefinitely, because that's just not really necessary or really useful. A huge problem for every city that I work for is funding and staffing levels. These are not really, these are not positions I think that the public really necessarily sees a lot of value in. Just on the, it's not somebody out on the street performing a service. It's really internal, and so it's just not as cool looking to fund these positions, but it's very important. There's also sometimes serial or difficult requesters. We're fortunate that we don't really have any here, but I've seen agencies that were almost brought to bankruptcy by public records requesters who continue to sue the agencies in frivolous lawsuits. And then it's also just, time consuming to keep up with those requests, even if they're not suing you. And then, of course, we have to keep this consistent documentation, and then we have to acquire and then maintain records from various third parties in some instances. So not every contractor that the city contracts with is someone that we would have to potentially that we'd have to produce public records for. If they're truly an independent contractor and they're not performing as the functional equivalent of a city employee, then we would not have to go, ask them to search their records. But we do have a lot of staff here, or a lot of consultants here for the city that do actually act as a functional equivalent of a city employee. So that can raise issues as well.
All right, Tisha Gieser, City Clerk, I'm going to take a few slides here. So responding to public records requests. Yeah, this is a little slow. So this is something that Hannah Haver, who is here with us tonight, shadowing as City Clerk, is our public records analyst in the clerk's office, and is handling a lot of these requests and provided this information. Thank you, Hannah. I skipped over a slide here that I want to cover. So some of the agency's obligations when we get a public records request is to respond within 5 days. If it's a straightforward request, we try and get the records out to people within that 5 days, but regardless if we can get any records together for them, we have to provide them a response. And this has become challenging as we are getting requests in all sorts of different ways, including sort of things that are going into junk email, that are going to employees that you wouldn't expect. People are really creative. And I would say, and sometimes maybe even trying to sort of catch agencies missing these requests. So that in itself is a challenge. So if records are available, we'll provide them. If not, we're required to provide an estimate of when the records will be ready. We'll then search for the records and provide responsive records, which often for larger requests includes providing them in batches, which we call installments. This sounds very straightforward, but can be very complex, especially if a request deals with a lot of sensitive information that might need to be closely reviewed and potentially redacted. And as Rachel said, we deal with high volumes of records here. I was just taking a look at some numbers we compiled last year. Outside of our third-party systems, we have about 40 terabits of data, and we currently have 80 million emails, around 80 million emails. As Rachel said, we are taking some steps to significantly reduce those to help limit our liability and time spent reviewing them. All right, so these are just some numbers I thought you might be interested in. Hannah has just compiled the reporting that we're required to submit to the state for 2025, and our public records requests are up 56% from last year. We'll be providing you a more detailed report on this once we fully flesh out some additional information, and cities around the state will be reporting, so it's always interesting for us to do some comparisons. This is showing you a breakdown of common requests. As you can see, police tends to be our largest type of records that are being requested. So I wanted to provide you a couple of recent email request examples, just to give you a sense of the types of requests that we're fielding from day to day, and also to just really emphasize to you that it is important that our records are centralized in city systems, which includes your records, because Hannah here is querying the city's email repository on a daily basis to respond to public records we get that include communications. And when people request communications, we sometimes need to do some clarifying with them, but typically we're thinking of things like Rachel mentioned, text messages, emails, phone messages, whatnot, and we're searching our city repositories and making an assumption that in general that our records are in those places. So that's why we really want you using your city email, your city cell phone, so that when we're doing these queries, we have confidence we're getting all the records that we need. So this is a request here on screen that I know has taken many, I think this is still in process. This has been a many month request. One more example here that actually called out specifically communications between city staff, elected officials, and the police department. And you know, it might be that in certain cases we're reaching out to you to get affidavits to confirm that you don't have any of these records on a personal device. But again, as part of this training, just really want to emphasize the value of centralizing. So searching, we're required to conduct an adequate search, and this means thinking about all the places a records might be, all the people who might have them, which could include personal devices, and providing responsive records. We need to be resourceful. Often when we start searching for records, we get leads, we find other names, we get sort of tips to other places we need to be looking, and so it can become a bit of a research project. And then, as I mentioned, if you are called out as your records being desired as part of a request, we might reach out to you to have you attest, search any locations you might have records, and let us know through an formal affidavit. Thank you.
All right, we're going to talk about exemptions. So when we get a public records request, we have to release the document essentially in its entirety, unless the document is exempt in part or whole. So what is an exemption? Exemptions are statutory allowances to withhold records or statutory demands, I guess, like their requirements that a record be held as confidential. Sometimes exemptions are kind of up to the agency's discretion, and then sometimes it's unlawful to release a particular piece of information or data. Exemptions are to be narrowly construed, so you basically go by the plain language of the exemption. This can be really challenging at times because exemptions are usually the result of lobbying activities, and it will be a very specific request to the legislature for an exemption. So you may see an exemption that is for certain personal information in the RCW, but it will be for that information as held by the Department of Health. And so we might have the same information, but we're not the Department of Health. And so obviously that puts us in a pretty awkward position because we know that that at least the legislature is saying that there's some sort of, privacy interest in this information. But at the same time, the statute has to be narrowly construed. And if it doesn't say any agency can withhold on that basis, then that's the way we have to operate. The general rule is that we withhold only the exempt information and we release the rest, which basically results in us redacting most of our records. It's very rare that we withhold a record in its entirety. There's only a few potential statutes, I think, where we'd have a plausible case for doing that. So it can be really time consuming because, for instance, applications for public employment are exempt, but we wouldn't redact the form that they're on. So then you're just going through and redacting everything that's in each little text box. It's a lot of fun. You can ask Hannah. Common exemptions. There's the attorney-client privilege and work product exemptions, which are honestly probably some of the more common ones for the records that we deal with, and certainly the most common ones that I have to personally handle. But then there's also a few others that we see a lot, such as personal information in personnel files. The statute actually describes what that personal information is, and that's one where I think we have gone a long way in the last 10 years in terms of legislature kind of expanding that and having a little bit more protection for employees and what's in their files. Also, investigative records can be withheld when the non-disclosure is essential for effective law enforcement, or if a victim or witness requests it, or if it would endanger someone's life or right to privacy. But I think the one that's really interesting here is that basically anyone who reports something to the police as a victim or witness, they can request non-disclosure, and regardless of whether we think that their life would be in jeopardy by releasing that information, their request governs, and so we wouldn't be able to release their information. And then, of course, things like financial accounts and social security numbers are fortunately exempt from release, so we don't give those out. This is just a sampling. I have a key that I use when I help process public records requests, and it's probably 10 pages long, full of single space. It's very long. There's probably hundreds of exemptions total. They're not hundreds that we use on a regular basis, but there are quite a few, and they're not only in the Public Records Act. They can be in other statutes, they can be in federal statutes and regs, so it can be pretty complicated to figure them out. All right, now we'll talk about social media and texts and other electronic records that I think are probably the most commonly created records for council members, that can be kind of also the trickiest to deal with under the Public Records Act. I mean, your emails are easy. They're in your, city email archive, and, we can pull those up ourselves. But these kind of records can be a little bit more challenging because of where they're held and the tests that we have to use to decide whether they're public records. So text messages and social media posts on your personal devices and accounts may constitute an agency's public records and be subject to the disclosure under the PRA if two things are met. The record has to relate to the conduct of government, and it has to be prepared within the scope of employment or official capacity, or when the position requires it, the agency directs it, or when it furthers the agency's interests. Obviously, that's not a very clear test. I'm a lawyer and I do a lot of public records work, and I'm not even very clear on it. That this test came from a case a few years ago, and it's what we'd call kind of a results-oriented decision, where maybe I think the court was probably trying to do the right thing, but in it they created a very complicated test that's very hard for us to sort of apply in practicality. So kind of as you'll hear throughout the evening, my recommendation is always just sort of err on the side of caution and retain various texts, social media posts, and what have you that you are creating sort of, as a council member and have to do with city business. I would probably just err on the side of caution and keep those and consider those to be public records. And you may be asked at some point to fill out what we call a Nissan affidavit, so don't be alarmed if that happens. That is just an affidavit that says that you searched your personal devices and, either says what you found on the personal device or that you didn't have any public records on those personal devices. And another thing that's just kind of important to keep in mind here is that judges can order review of your personal devices too, which is just another reason to not use personal accounts to the extent you can. Or if you are going to use a personal account, like I know I've talked to a few of you about maybe having like a separate Gmail account so that you can send various things to yourself that are related to your job as a council member. I strongly recommend that you have it be solely for you create a separate personal account that's solely for city work, because it is possible that you would have to just open that, give it all access to a judge, and I don't think most people would want to do that with all of their entire email archive.
All right. Okay, so let's talk about text messages a little bit. So the city has adopted a text message policy, and one of the things that we say in the policy is we encourage staff to not use text too much. So obviously we need everyone to be able to function. We need you to be able to function in your role, but I will tell you, querying text messages is very challenging. There's not a lot of context, as you can imagine. It's number to number. So we just say as a best practice, just think about that. If you are going to have a more lengthy dialogue in writing, certainly email is going to be preferred, and then always a phone call, a meeting, an in-person conversation are wonderful methods to communicate, as they don't produce records or minimal records. However, certainly texting is something that we have to acknowledge happens. This is why you have your city cell phones, and as part of our text message policy, we're archiving the text messages of all of our senior level staff, our entire police department, the city council, mayor, and supervisors in most of our departments. And so your phone, when you got your city cell phone, you at some point got a message from the clerk's office letting you know that your phone was archiving. So we can now query your text messages if we get a public records request. And the copies on your phones are therefore copies. I'll tell you in a minute why we felt very motivated to do this. A comment that your photos may or may not be syncing to your OneDrive. If you're someone who takes photos a lot as part of your role, maybe reach out to us and we can work with IT to just make sure that's happening. If you're not using photos often, don't worry about it. All right, so, just some comments about your personal phone. If you end up, I know carrying two phones is probably a huge hassle, so let's just acknowledge that. But also let's acknowledge that if you are using a personal phone for texting related to your role as a council member, you have a responsibility to retain those records. I know recently I'm reaching the end of my iCloud storage. And so one of the things I was suggested to do was change my text message retention to 30 days. So if you have council-related texts on your phone, just be mindful of that and consider getting us text messages of substance, which you could screenshot, or we can work with you on exporting them. As Rachel said in an earlier question, some of those text messages, if they're things like running late, meeting you here, you know, things like that, those can be deleted. But anything that has any more substance than that, we should be preserving, because in your roles, there's a high value on your records and a long retention period for your communication records. So as I mentioned at this last point here, if you know you have some text.
Oh, one second.
Yep.
Deputy President Chang.
Yes.
You mentioned there's a long retention period. Out of curiosity, what is that period exactly?
So for the archives, I'm not pleased with how they've construed this, but they say for your records, anytime you're communicating with stakeholders, which can be community members, each other, other elected officials, the records have to be kept as long as you're in office, and then they have to be appraised by the state archives for potential transfer and archival preservation. We have not yet attempted to transfer text messages, and I suspect that when we go to, they may not be interested, which might change our approach. But at this point, we're just following that advice.
Great, thank you.
So one of the reasons we were motivated to put this policy in place and pay for this archiving tool, as you might have seen in the news, there was a pretty significant lawsuit that the city of Seattle had to pay because some of their staff, including their mayor's text messages, were accidentally, deleting or not accidentally, they were deleting. And so we just really wanted to provide some protection to our council members and staff in this area. All right, so I'm going to transition, and we're kind of doing a preview, presenting the council's draft social media policy that is technically part of your next agenda item, but we thought the context fit well here. So I'm going to go ahead and talk to you about the Council Rules Ad Hoc Committee and the work they did to create the council's first social media policy. So in general, the social media policy is very flexible and encouraging and acknowledging that council members may choose to use social media platforms. But does say that, the content and tenor of those communications in your role as a council member should be professional. There's also some suggested disclaimers that council members can use that talk about the fact that the viewpoints that you are relaying are yours and not those of the city council, and also kind of disclosing to anyone who's interacting with you on that platform that those communications may be subject to the Public Records Act. There will be a URL provided with this information if you choose to use it. Also, the second part of the policy, so in general, the policy is offering some guidelines on the use of social media, but it's also acknowledging there are some legal requirements to be aware of, and this is a list that if you've taken a look at the council rules, there's a little more information provided with each of these as to some of the things that you should be considering when you're using social media. The training tonight is covering the first two, and really the confidential and sensitive information is just thinking about information you're sharing on those public platforms, potentially public platforms, ensuring it's not confidential or sensitive. And then quasi-judicial matters are things that come up from time to time and shouldn't be shared. Or communication shouldn't be occurring outside of meetings. So the policy also says, well, it wants to have a very open-ended approach to council members using social media, but also encouraging some best practices. And these are a list of best practices that Madrona put together. Our commitment is to work on building this out a little bit, as well as some FAQs to provide council members as they're onboarded, and then just sort of maybe periodically as some friendly reminders, and as technology changes. So this includes avoiding commingling, as Rachel said, and we talked to staff a lot about this. We really want a bright line between your personal devices and accounts and your official accounts. I will add here, if you have things that you're using in your employment or systems or calendaring tools, I don't know what it might be, and it's something you're interested in using in your council member role, reach out to us, because our IT department has licenses for a lot of different software systems. And if it's something that you would like to use in your role as a council member, we want to try and help you, and we want to try and get a city account for you. So please reach out. Then the second point here is back to those disclaimers we talked about, and then understanding if you have authority, which you are not issued sort of city-sponsored accounts, but certainly as council members, you have the ability to communicate about city issues. So some other best practices, trying to keep an open forum, so avoiding blocking other users, avoiding removing or hiding comments on posts for these platforms, and then directing people to, and that's towards your protecting First Amendment rights. Then also directing people to official methods of communication, trying to help ensure that people are getting consistent messaging, so pointing people to the city website when able. As Rachel explained, another best practice that we will be using on occasion is requesting an affidavit, ensuring that you've searched any platforms you're using. Don't be scared of using social media, but be mindful about it being the message there. So a few, I'm concluding this section with a few just practices in general.
One second, Council President Martz.
Can we go back a slide? I am surprised that this is not more restrictive. It was my understanding that, like, if I go post in Facebook to my friends, and I say to my friends something about the city, that's a meeting. Is it not?
You are jumping ahead. There are some definite Open Public Meetings Act considerations if a quorum of you are interacting on a social media platform, including commenting on each other's posts that Rachel is going to touch on. So that is a problem.
There's more coming. There's more coming about social media beyond this slide.
Well, we're wrapping up social media, but as far as Open Public Meetings Act, so 4 of you, or if you're on a committee, 2 of you.
No. I wasn't talking about any other council members.
Okay.
Just me and my set of friends, right? And let's say I'm not friends with any of these people. For the sake of argument, my understanding is if you have a social media list that is closed, that is a violation of OPMA. Is it not?
I would say that is not a violation of the OPMA if you're the only elected official in Issaquah that's on it. That would be permissible under the policy. Recognizing folks, including friends and family, who are commenting on your post, those posts could be subject to the Public Records Act. You would need to figure out how to preserve, which I'm about to talk about, preserve that record, which could be tricky. But no, this policy wouldn't preclude that.
All right, thank you.
It's easy to, it does create a situation where it's easy to inadvertently violate the OPMA, though. But it isn't in it of itself. The post is not a violation.
But OPMA doesn't care. If I were to get, like, physically, if I got 100 people in the community together, I said, I'm going to invite persons A, B, C, D, E, F, G, but only those people. And I'm going to have a conversation about Issaquah policy, and everyone else is excluded from that meeting. That's not a violation of OPMA.
Well, technically, if you are just the only council member there and there's not a quorum, then it's not a meeting.
All right.
Because it has, but,
All right.
you know,
Okay.
it is a problem if you are friends with other council members and they might be interacting on your post.
Right. Thank you.
All right, so first point, use city stuff. Second point, avoid forwarding emails to and from your personal accounts when possible. As Rachel said as well, just thinking about the fact that just because you're doing something on your personal email doesn't preclude it from being city record. It doesn't really matter where it's at. It's more about the content. If you're unsure if you should be using city email for something, you can always reach out to us for some clarification there. But like Rachel said, we would err on the side of being conservative in using your city account for things that might be perceived as city business. Also, using for note-taking and just other records you're generating as part of your council work. You all have a city OneDrive account. So I'd encourage you to, I don't know if you are OneNote users, but certainly in OneDrive, you can save any type of file. And those records are all searchable when we're doing e-discovery in Microsoft Purview. If you don't know how to use your OneDrive account and would like a little refresher on that, let us know. We're happy to show you that. If you're using a third-party tool, which would include a social media system or something else, if it's something that you need in your role as a council member, let's talk and see if we can get you a license to something. If you're generating records in this new in this social media area on a social media platform, We would encourage you to be proactive about capturing those records. So, it's easy to think, okay, I know where all of these posts are, but years down the road, it could become challenging for you to retrieve those. And while we have been fortunate in the last few years to not have a high volume of council-focused public records requests, they can come at any time and they can be onerous. And so we'd encourage you to save content to your OneDrive account. Again, if you'd like some assistance with knowing how to best preserve some of your social media content, we're happy to provide some advice. Another best practice would be making content publicly available. So if something's easily available with no login, we can just point people to the records. We don't have to actually provide them. So that's something to consider when you're generating content. And then tracking dates. So if you have a blog or you're on a social media platform, I would strongly suggest making some notes about that time frame. So if we get a request and you get that Neeson affidavit, you didn't have a Blue Sky account or a Reddit account at the time period that's being requested. So this is something we're trying to train staff on as well. With that, I'm going to turn it back over to Rachel.
Councilmember Walsh.
Just a question on that. If you go back a slide, suggested something about not forwarding emails to and from your personal accounts. If someone did send something city related to a personal account, then it does make sense so that we can create the record in our city email, correct?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yes.
Thank you.
But it would also still be a record in your personal account that you would have to keep. Just a sad aside on that. Okay, thank you, Tasha. Legal challenges and penalties, the really fun part of this. So the Public Records Act is judicially enforced. However, cities can adopt an administrative review process, which is not quite an appeal process, but it's a mechanism for requesters to ask you to reconsider your decision under the Public Records Act or relook at something that they think maybe you got wrong. Issaquah does have that in their policy. But someone doesn't have to use that. So it's not like other lawsuits where you have to exhaust your administrative remedies. A person who feels they are aggrieved under the Public Records Act can sue, and the act is enforced by the courts. The penalties, as I mentioned previously, they can be very hefty. A court can award penalties up to $100 per record, per page, per day. It's not common. You'd have to be it would have to be a pretty egregious violation to see $100 per page, but it does happen. The requester is also entitled to attorney's fees and costs if they prevail. Note that the agency is not entitled to their attorney's fees and costs if they prevail. So unfortunately, that's just a cost that we have to bear. And then we would have to bear it for the requester if we ended up losing the case. The court can also review records in camera, which means that they, privately review the records and they can decide whether or not the exemptions apply and whether or not they should have to be disclosed. There can also, outside of the PRA, there can be potential criminal liability for willful destruction or alteration of public records, and then it's potential that you could forfeit your office if you were to have found to have engaged in that. There's a 1-year statute of limitations on PRA lawsuits, and it starts to run from the date that the agency claims the exemption or when we last produce records as our final definitive response. And so we actually put in a little disclaimer that says when this is occurring so that there's no confusion in court as to whether or not the statute of limitations has begun. Oh, and another thing on the penalties is that the court can look at aggravating or mitigating factors, and they do. And I won't go through all of them, but essentially, if there are factors that make the city look bad, like it looks like you intentionally took too long, you intentionally were messing with a requester, you were deleting records, then you're going to see larger penalties than if there was just a truly inadvertent error or someone just dropped the ball, which does happen from time to time. So courts tend to try to be a little bit more lenient about that. You want me to just keep going? Yeah, okay. So we already talked a lot about retaining public records. They have to be retained in accordance with the local government's retention schedule. As Tisha said, your records in particular have a pretty long retention. It's not uncommon for records to have to be reviewed by the archives to decide whether or not to keep them. I'm glad I don't have that job. And if they decide they don't want them, then we can destroy. Or if they've met the retention and there's no review by the archives required. If you've ever been to the archives, it's very interesting. It's already really full, so I don't know how they keep all of this stuff, but that's their problem, not ours. All right, finally, we're going to talk about the Open Public Meetings Act, or the OPMA as we like to call it. So as you're aware, all meetings of the governing body are must be open to the public and accessible to all. What is the governing body? That's you. That's or it could be other groups too, but it's the multi-member board, committee, commission, council, or other policy or rulemaking body of a public agency or a committee thereof, which important to note that it does apply to council committees here. And what is a meeting? A meeting is means any. It's one of those really circular definitions. A meeting means a meeting. A meeting means a meeting where any action is taken. Well, action is very broadly defined under the OPMA to basically mean any deliberation, any discussion, any decision, or making a final decision is final action, but just talking about something is a meeting technically under the OPMA. So we already kind of talked about this, but you know, receiving public testimony, things like that, all of these things include, these all fall within the broad definition of action under the OPMA. Yes.
Councilmember Dare.
Yeah, so it's like the committees one is the one where I often have question and concern. So like as part of, you know, safety services and park, in terms of what I can talk about, and is it real, like with my other council members, of anything that could fall into that committee? Is it only stuff that might be on an agenda? It's like, I'm not quite sure what we can talk about with that specific committee, since that's only two of us, and
Right.
suddenly that could be a quorum.
You're right, that does pose a really tricky thing. I would say that at the very least, don't talk about anything that you know is going to be discussed in the committee. It's kind of an err on the side of caution thing there. I think that obviously if something comes up, you know, weeks, months down the road and you happen to talk about that, I don't think we're talking about serious risk there, but no, like it does make it difficult for a committee to operate, because I think, you know, it would be great if, you know, two members of the committee could sit around and talk together about what we should bring forward to the committee, what are topics to add. And unfortunately, those are conversations that just should be held in a committee meeting, because otherwise I think you're potentially, you know, we treat our committees as subject to the OPMA, and that means that if, you know, a quorum of that committee is two people. So it is better to err on the side of caution and have those conversations publicly. But I do know that it's hard and, you know, really does pose some logistical challenges to the functioning of the committees. A meeting can be over email. A meeting can be out in the parking lot after a regular city council meeting if you're continuing to talk about city business. If you're talking about, you know, your kids and personal things, not a meeting. But once again, if you are talking about matters that are that are related to your role as a council member, it's probably a meeting.
Deputy President Chang.
No.
Oh. Council President Martz.
People confuse us all the time. So for the newer council members, I just want to provide a little context on the subject of committees. This was a thing that we really went back and forth before any of you, while Russell was off council and before I think any of you except Lindsay, we went through a phase where we didn't have committees, right? And we had, 5-hour committees of the whole. And we had all 7 of us digging into every issue. And so this, if the challenges associated, what you are hearing is the real challenges associated with committees, and it's why we tried going away from committees for a while. And if it feels awkward and you feel hamstrung at all by how things have to work, just recognize that this is the lesser of two evils. And the larger of two evils was having 5-hour cows every month. So, thanks.
Now we're going to talk about serial meetings, because when you're talking about the OPMA, I think it's really important to talk about them because I think they're probably the biggest source of inadvertent OPMA violations. So what is a serial meeting? It's a meeting that occurs when a majority of the governing body has a series of smaller gatherings amongst themselves or communications that ends up resulting in a majority of the governing body taking action, which once again can just be discussion or deliberation, even if the majority isn't actually ever a part of this communication. So it can occur, by forwarding emails around or just by playing games of telephone where a couple people talk to someone or talk to each other and then someone calls another person and says, oh, so-and-so and I talked about this and what do you think of this? There's multiple ways that it can occur. It does require the collective intent to meet. There does have to be some sort of measure of intent there. However, as you probably, you saw my email communication regarding the Burien case last week, that collective and, council members can potentially, submit declarations to the court saying they didn't have the collective intent to meet, and it could be potentially found that they did. So there still is a risk there. Passive receipt of information is not a violation, which is why the council is able to be copied on, emails that the council president and deputy council president send out to the community. Because as long as it's just important that people aren't replying all and having a conversation there, but that's okay. Executive sessions. As you know, the OPMA has several exceptions to it, and the main one is for executive sessions or closed sessions, which are technically a little bit different, but we won't get into that. But executive sessions can only be held for the limited purposes that are set forth in statute. Obviously, pending or potential litigation is a really common one. Also, real estate acquisitions or sales. Executive sessions may only occur if before the executive session, the presiding officer announces the purpose of and the time the executive session is going to be over, and then the discussion can take place behind closed doors, but then any decisions have to take place in the public meeting, and of course, we can't vote or use secret ballots. So what is the test for an OPMA violation? So it occurs when a majority of the body meets with the collective intent to transact official business. And once again, business, it's a broad definition here. And during the meeting, the council members take action, which is also, of course, broadly defined. So what happens if someone violates the OPMA? The penalties. The court can impose $500 civil penalties. Those are a personal liability. That's against each council person that is found to have committed a violation. If there are subsequent violations, the civil penalty increases to $1,000. The court will also award costs and attorney's fees to a successful party. And that's, a successful challenger. Once again, this is another one where the city does not get its attorney's fees generally for these. But that, I would say that's the biggest source of risk for the city, at least as an entity, because those attorney's fees can be really costly. Not that $500 or $1,000 isn't also costly, but it's not $20,000 or $50,000, so it's less than that. They can also find that the action is declared null and void. But we've seen cases where folks sue even when there was no action to be declared null and void. You know, they just sort of on principle want to say that there was a violation, and they can do that, and the court can award them their attorney's fees for that. Now we're going to talk just briefly about best practices for not violating the OPMA. Meet more frequently, use the committee system like we have here, even though it is sort of limited, and so that you don't have to have, cows as frequently. Use the city administrator or another staff person to filter your information or questions through. Don't discuss city business with more than 2 other council members outside of a open meeting, and of course be more careful when it's a committee. Don't discuss really committee business with other members of the same committee outside of a committee meeting. And if you have discussed something as a group of 3, just all 3 of you be cognizant about that, and don't go talking to a 4th person about the same thing, because that can be an issue there too. And when in doubt, discuss it in a public meeting. Be careful with executive sessions. This is why we stay on topic. We don't overuse them. These, like the PRA exemptions, have to be narrowly construed. So, that's why we have to be kind of careful, and we can't talk about everything related to a real estate acquisition, only certain things. Don't make sure that you discuss matters publicly after the executive session prior to voting, so it makes it clear to the public that you weren't making a decision in the executive session. And then, of course, don't discuss what happened in an executive session with anyone else outside of that executive session, because it's illegal to disclose this type of confidential information that you obtain as a part of your role in your position. And there's actually a $500 penalty and the potential for forfeiture of office for that.
Council President Martz.
So this, can you go back?
Yes.
Last slide. So this so we're going to have a conversation later as part of rules of procedure about confidential information. Does RCW 42.23.070 section 4 define confidential information?
No, it does not. So we have to sort of, it's a good question of, is anything that you discuss in executive session confidential? This does come up from time to time. I would say the fact that you discussed it in the executive session is confidential. So you wouldn't want to say, we discussed XYZ in an executive session. You wouldn't want to tell that to a public member of the public. However, if X was something that is public information, you're not suddenly then precluded from sharing that information. You just wouldn't want to tell the person that you just were discussing that in the executive session. Does that make sense?
Does RCW 42.23070 cover only executive sessions?
No, I'd actually, that one, let me look at that one really fast. Does look like it's within the OPMA, but
conversation we're going to have later.
There are, generally, I do think that, no, this is within the code. Yeah, this covers everything. This is not within that. This is just, it's actually part of the code of ethics for municipal officers. And so this would apply to like an email. If I send you a privileged email, you are putting yourself at risk of forfeiture of office if you share that with publicly. So any confidential information that you obtain as a part of your role.
I'm going to come back to this topic
Yeah,
later.
absolutely.
Thank you.
Avoid situations that can present an appearance of an OPMA violation. texting during meetings is one of those. The people can see you kind of, on your phone leaning over doing that from time to time. Your situation up here is a little bit better than some of the dioceses that I've seen before, but I've sat in meetings where I saw the governing body text each other, and it was very obvious they were texting each other during the meeting, and it did result in some distrust in the community. So that's something that's just something to be careful of. And obviously, even if you're texting other people, no one knows who you're texting, and people can be, they can kind of make bad assumptions. So be careful about that. Just remember that your text messages are regarding the city business are open to disclosure. So just be careful what you put in text. Be careful when you're using social media. Make sure that you, like we talked about previously, if you are posting, make sure that you are watching the comments and making sure that 4 council members aren't engaging in a discussion. You just have to be kind of more mindful of those things. I've seen other agencies have really complicated procedures for that, like having a social media ombudsman who's the only person who's designated to respond in comment strings and things like that. I don't think you necessarily need to do anything like that, but you just have to be kind of mindful that you're not having multiple people engage in a conversation online. There's some additional resources that you'll have in your packet if you need them, and I think with that, that's it. If anyone has any questions, otherwise we'll move on.
I think we asked them as we went. Oh, Councilmember Walsh.
I don't have any questions. I would just say, as someone who came on council before we had city cell phones and had to deal with a public records request on our personal phones and personal emails, thank you very much for having us trained and getting us the resources so that we don't have to do that other than in very rare cases. Thank you.
Well, we just wait until they ask for your data for the records in native format with metadata. Then that becomes a real nightmare if it's on your personal device. So yes, good word of caution.
Okay, I think this takes us to Agenda Bill 9137, Amendments to Council Rules of Procedure. And we're going to have our City Clerk, Tisha, come back up.
All right, Tisha Geezer, City Clerk. I'm going to make this real quick and then turn it over to the committee to talk further. But I am speaking to AB 9137, Amendments to Council Rules of Procedure. There we go. Okay. Okay, so at your February 23rd council meeting, there were 23 proposed review areas to the council rules, and the council decided wisely to appoint an ad hoc committee to take a look at those areas. Council President Dee Michelle at the time had been appointed to the committee, but ultimately the committee membership was council members Walsh as chair and Nichols and Joe. The committee was tasked with making recommendations on amendments to the rules in time for this meeting, and say the committee was timely in their reporting. So the committee met 4 times, starting on March 24th, ending last Tuesday. The majority of the committee did request, the first meeting was not in an open forum, and the committee did request that the remainder of the meetings be held in an open space and the materials be publicly available. The committee reviewed those 23 review areas that were included in the February 23 packet and then added 5 additional review areas. A few of those were staff motivated, a few of those were committee motivated. Those additions were included in your packet, but were special meetings, virtual attendance, confidentiality, use of staff time, and correspondence. So the committee recommended many changes throughout the rules, many of which were fairly minor. These are the 8 areas the committee felt it would be useful to briefly cover these items with the council. So I'm going to walk through these pretty quickly here. So the first one regarding standing committee appointments. The council committees, as Council President Mart stated, were reinstated in 2022. And in the years 2023, 24, and 25, the council waived this struck out provision in the council rules and appointed, in all those cases, the deputy council president to 2 committees, which was precluded in the rules. And so the committee recommended removing that sentence, which the effect of that is that the 3 committee chairs can only serve on 1 committee, but if this is removed, the other 4 council members, including council leadership, could serve on 2 committees.
Council President Martz.
Yeah, could the folks on the committee explain a little bit why they wanted to change this policy?
Yeah, I brought this up because as council president previously, it was often very difficult based on council members' schedules to find a way to make this work. And so we wanted to provide the flexibility. I think it's still a best practice to try and distribute that out. But we felt that both it gives the flexibility, and by the fact that we had to make the adjustment 3 years in a row, that it was a needed bit of flexibility.
Thank you.
I'd like to
Councilmember
add
Joe.
additional comments. This council has been kind of boxing above their weight in terms of committee commitments at SCA or other regional committees as well. And we're finding that because we're doing so much outside of Issaquah itself, to balance the workload, oftentimes it's important to have more people on the bench, so to speak, fill those spots for our internal committees. So this allows the flexibility to do that outside work and still have a robust bench to fill the committees here internally.
Thank you. I appreciate that explanation.
The next item is virtual attendance. The committee is recommending increasing the flexibility for attending virtually. This policy was added when the council came back in person following COVID, and I think it does make sense that it would be looked at again a few years down the road. So the changes, so there's these 2 classifications of why you might attend virtually. If it's for medical reasons, there weren't really changes there. There might have been a little softening of the language, but there's no restriction on the number of meetings you can attend virtually, no approval needed. What the committee requested changes to is if you're attending virtually for another reason, they wanted to change it from requiring approval of the council president to just notifying the council president. And then there had been a limit of 4 meetings per year by which a council member could attend virtually for non-medical reasons. They wanted to increase that to 5 and then add a process if a council member wanted to attend or needed to attend more than 5 council meetings a year virtually, whereby they could request it from council leadership, and council leadership would provide sort of approval in writing.
Councilmember Boyd.
More of a comment, and I'm not supposed to really make that. It should be a question, but I just, as someone who commutes during a particular season of the year for my day job, I sincerely appreciate this proposed switch.
All right, the next section is confidentiality. This was something that was brought forward by the administration. So the council rules do talk about council members' responsibility to maintain information confidential in the context of executive sessions, but there wasn't anything more in the rules about other information the council might be receiving, such as Rachel said, related by email, attorney-client privilege information about active police investigations, information you might be provided in advance of an executive session in writing, by phone. And so there is a section in the proposed rules. This is just one excerpt. There is more there. The committee had, there was a minority report on this item, and the council member may want to speak to that, but there was some concern that there could be some subjectivity here, and there was a sentence that was added basically saying the administration needs to be responsible to identify to the council members when they're conveying something that needs to remain confidential, so that you know. So that language was added, but there was still some disagreement on this point.
Council President Martz.
So I've looked at section 311, and it specifically talks about information that's exempt from disclosure under the Public Records Act. So my question for the administration is there anticipated, I guess I want confirmation that that is the definition that we're going to use on confidential information, especially after hearing tonight that the penalty for sharing confidential information is potential, relinquishing of office. So that's how it's worded here. If we get 2 weeks into it and the administration says they have some information that they consider confidential, but it doesn't meet the exemption from the Public Records Act, then we're not in compliance with what's in Section 311. So I think it's important. So I just want to ask, is that the administration's understanding? Because that's how it's written in 311. And it's fine if that's what it is, but if it's then what the administration decides is confidential and it's not exempted by the Public Records Act, then we have a problem.
I'm looking at Wally or Rachel to see who wants to take the first.
I think that's a pretty safe and broad enough definition of confidential to meet everything that we would want to keep confidential. I feel pretty comfortable with it. I'm sitting here and I can't think of anything that wouldn't fall within that. Once again, my only caution would be, to the extent it's executive session, just don't talk about what you talked about there, period, even if there's a little, non-confidential information scattered within it. But no, as far as the definition goes, this should cover everything. It's going to cover attorney-client privilege. It's going to cover work product. It's going to cover all sorts of sensitive information about people in the city. So I think it should be good.
Thank you.
Councilmember Walsh.
If that isn't our interpretation of that, is it possible to change that chapter number from 46.56 to the actual portion in there that defines exemption or confidentiality? Because that is a big honkin' chapter.
There's literally like hundreds of exemptions under the Public Records Act, so I don't think there's any way to cite them all.
Okay.
Councilmember Dare.
So yeah, my question with this section is I read it as that essentially if we're talking to city staff and the city just tells us this is confidential, it just becomes confidential and we're not allowed to relay that, which to me then makes me just wonder, it's like if the city just feels something is embarrassing and it just doesn't want it out and it tells us it's confidential, we now can't talk about it anymore. And so I'm curious if there is any kind of, if I'm misunderstanding that it really is only very specific things, or how this confidentiality is decided from the administration for us of what we're allowed or not allowed to say.
I would say from the administration's perspective here that we would only be telling you to keep information confidential to the extent that it is essentially something that would be exempt from public disclosure. That's been our background conversation here, is that if we want you to have information, and we'll even give you all of this information, but if something is not information that we would release to just anybody, I think the intent of this section is that we would indicate that, in our communication to you and why.
And I think the practical application is it's almost easier for us to share just the entire email with all the information, because to create the public records version takes a fair amount of staff time to redact. And so I think our initial response and open transparency is to try to just share. But then I think any council member does have the option of saying, well, I do want to be able to share this information, so please give me the redacted version. And so I think that's kind of, the vision of how it would play out.
Correct. And, just something to keep in mind, just to make yourself feel better here on this point, a court would never, if we said, well, this is confidential just because it's, embarrassing, a court would not be using our definition of confidential when they were deciding whether or not to assess you a $500 penalty for disclosing confidential information. And for, there would have to be a legal basis for us to consider it confidential for the purposes of that.
Councilmember Walsh.
So if the concept is that information can be provided to us that might be confidential, but if we wanted to request it, we could get a redacted version. That isn't mentioned in here? That isn't referenced as a concept or a solution, and what then makes something not confidential? So I'm still having a hard time with that.
I mean, I would think like it's, and correct me if I'm saying this wrong, but I think you as a council member request information, you would get two versions. You would get like the one that you would get, it's just an Issaquah resident, which would be how you release your public records with redactions to honor all the stuff. You as a council member, the way our administration is pursuing it is willing to give you all the information, but then say, this is confidential. So now you might know names of people who specifically, I think, to Rachel's point, can say, like, I consider myself a victim of the situation. I do not want my name released. And so now their name is sacred through public records. It cannot be released through public records. You as a council member in our current situation is we are sharing that name, but then we're putting the disclaimer, like we're giving you confidential information because this person said they were a victim of this situation. And because they said that, we're not allowed through any public records request to reveal their name because they have that right. And so I think that's...
And I get that. I guess coming from the rules ad hoc, one of the points we were trying to create is clarity that both someone who reads these rules, maybe as a future council member, can understand how they handle confidential information and what the remedy might be for a situation. So we did try and put in there, something related to, hey, if you disagree, this is how. But I think that additional information, I guess I would ask our city clerk, is that an adjustment that we could potentially make in order to reference a possible way to address the receipt of confidential information that we still feels bears information that could go out to the public?
I'm sure we could come up with some language to achieve what you're talking about. And, it's always an interesting balance with the rules, kind of figuring out what level of detail to include. So, yes, if the body would like to have some language explaining how council member might approach. From my understanding, a lot of this is really about timing, and you're getting information early in some cases. So, Wally, do you have anything to add?
We'd be happy. I would just hesitate to do this on the floor tonight. So if this is something you'd like us to continue working on, we can take that as a to-do. We can finish the presentation if there's anything else, and then bring this back. I mean, we would like to wrap this up, but there's no great urgency if it takes another meeting to do that. So we'll be happy to work through some language and come back at a future meeting.
All right.
Oh, Councilmember Nichols.
If we can go back for a second. So yeah, I thought it'd be useful so I was the dissenting council member on this one, so I wanted to give my rationale for that. And it's not, on the face of this, I think this is a very reasonable part of any rules. There's oftentimes confidential information that will come up. My concern was that is on part related to what Councilmember Walsh brought up about if we're going to add this in there, we should have it should be complete in a sense, that it should also give some advice to people of how to respond in certain situations. And part of that is because this is truly a hypothetical. I think we have a good situation at the moment where we are able to share confidential information, and that seems to be working fine. I did ask the question if this had ever been a problem, and there weren't any examples given of this being a problem with the council. So I think if knowing that it is purely a hypothetical, the utility of this becomes in guidance for future council members to understand, here's some norms written down a little more explicitly, as well as here's some expectations for, or our expectations of the administration in terms of what paths are available when there is a disagreement, or some sort of pathway to have this not be the final act, so to speak, that ends with a reference to fines and removal from office. So I would also, I would say I would prefer to strike this for the moment, come back to it. I think it's something that is reasonable to have in there in some way, but to slightly clarify both escalation pathways if we do disagree with something, as well as an understanding that public records are always requestable by anybody, and they should understand that, and it's also something you can do as a council member as well.
And I would say just as I mean, my plan was to give Councilmember Walsh, as the chair of the committee, a chance to kind of explain the committee recommendations. And so why don't we get into those nuances, but let's try to get through the rest of this presentation. And then I think I'm going to turn it over to Councilmember Walsh as the chair to kind of share comments. And then I think we can have council discussion.
Okay. All right, so the next policy, much more benign, travel and meals. Council basically has a really old resolution that got a bit lost there for a while from 2008. So the committee recommended repealing the resolution, moving the council's expenditure policy into the rules, and made some changes. There used to have to be council president approval if you were going to spend over $250 on travel or training. The committee recommended increasing, or just going with a $500 threshold, which is also consistent with the past policy. The $500 threshold would require council approval under good of the order at a council meeting. And in other regards, the council would be looking to the city's internal travel and meals policy for the nuances of travel and per diem and reimbursement and all of those things. The social media policy we covered in the training earlier, so I wasn't planning to discuss that further. The committee spent a lot of time talking through the new business process. The new business process has been used a few times recently, and it does have multiple steps, 3 steps before an item gets added to the planning calendar. The committee discussed what has emerged as a bit of a practice, which is for items, and recently, and actually looking in the past, I saw a few examples of, for example, a resolution supporting a ballot measure. Council Member Walsh brought one up where she had an intention to amend a resolution the council had previously adopted. In these cases, council members made a motion under good of the order, and these items got put on, typically it was the next meeting agenda. And so the committee agreed to enshrine that process and distinguished those items as not requiring significant staff time. So they're things that really are council motivated and led. And then they also took a look at the current new business process, which requires the form, introduction by a council member, then another meeting for the staff response, and they wanted to compress that. And so they basically recommend compressing that council member introduction with the staff response, and that happening at one meeting. And then they wanted to reduce the overall threshold to add new items to the planning calendar and subsequent agendas to 3 council members instead of currently it takes a majority of the council, and that's just a majority of the members present. The next change was recommended by staff. The council rules currently say that if you abstain from voting, it counts as a yes vote. That is not a common understanding of what an abstention is. Typically, abstaining is not voting, so we recommend changing that. But council members intending to abstain, you do need to say something because we do voice votes here. It's really difficult to know if someone abstained, so you under discussion would clarify that. A reason you might choose to abstain, abstentions are strongly discouraged in the municipal code and in the rules still, but a reason you might choose to abstain is if you have a perceived conflict of interest, but it's not significant enough to be a full-fledged conflict of interest, but you just can't get comfortable voting, that might be a reason you choose to do that. Another change to this section was currently the rules say that a majority of the council has to agree that you not vote if you have a legitimate conflict of interest, which was just confusing. So if you have spoken with the city attorney and understand you truly have a conflict of interest under state law, we do not want you voting, and the rules would say that you would actually leave the room for that portion of the meeting. The last change, and this actually was a no change, but it was something that there was some attention on before the committee met, so we thought it warranted mentioning, is the committee did discuss for some amount of time this concept of a potential audit committee or financial committee, and ultimately felt comfortable with the council's existing processes of designating 1 to 2 council members to participate in the city's annual audit entrance and exit meetings with the state auditors, and using the committee of the whole meetings and the retreats to kind of discussing those bigger financial picture issues. So ultimately, in your rules, you do not see any kind of new committee being formed, as was that idea had been tossed out last year. So again, thank you to the Ad Hoc Rules Committee. Again, 4 meetings, a lot of review, a lot of thoughtful review and consideration of these ideas. There are some proposed amendments in your packet, and I'll turn it over to you, Mayor. Thank you.
Okay, I'm going to turn it over to Councilmember Walsh. Council President Martz first.
Can Clerk Geezer, can you mention one topic you did not cover was around rules for public participation? And there were some changes there, proposed changes.
Thank you. Yeah, there were some proposed changes there, and that was really to better clarify. The rules had some language that the city attorney and I both felt mildly uncomfortable with because it implied that the chair could remove someone from the chamber or cut them off because they had sort of disparaging comments and weren't having what we might consider appropriate conduct. But we know that First Amendment protections are strong. And actually the recommendation is, and we've had this experience here, where unfortunately we've had to listen to some pretty terrible public comment. But unfortunately, we feel that it's in the agency's best interest to go ahead and endure the public comment. So it draws a bit more of a line between just saying something that might not be appropriate versus truly disrupting the meeting, in which case if someone is truly preventing the council from moving through their meeting, in those cases we could have someone removed legitimately.
Yeah, my eye actually caught a little bit different part of it. It was an addition that said, and to set an overall maximum duration for the public comment period. Maximum duration is set. Efforts will be made to ensure there is equal opportunity for individuals to speak in support of and opposition to an issue.
Sorry, thank you. Yes, so that was another recommendation. So the council has a limit of 5 minutes of public comment, and there is some discretion by the presiding officer, but there's nothing in the rules saying that there can be any cap put on public comment. I think not in the real recent past, but the council has seen some issues come here where the room is full and we have 50 people wanting to make public comments. And so this was recommended to suggested to the committee as a potential tool to be used sparingly and thoughtfully, but if the council has a busy agenda, to allow some parameter to put in place. Maybe it's 2 hours of public comment. So that's why the addition was suggested. Committee members might have other thoughts, but that was the administration's thought.
I would love to know what the committee thought about that.
Well, Councilmember Walsh, this leads to a good segue. Go ahead.
This was a staff recommendation, and we did mention that it was important to make sure that we were hearing from both sides of an issue and not just necessarily in the order at which people signed up, so that could not be used to silence a group. And that it be used sparingly, but that it was a tool that we were comfortable adding into our rules.
Thank you.
Councilmember Nichols.
Yeah, and just to second that, I think sparing is the key word, and if it ever became a problem, I think we would want to address that perhaps immediately, even at that same meeting we could. To take effect the next meeting perhaps, but the thought here is that there are some regional board meetings come to mind where there are, 100 people that have signed up. Something that happens frequently at those is just to reduce the total amount of time people have to speak individually, so everybody can still speak, but overall compress to a more reasonable amount of time. And I think there is also, looking at that charitably, there is a public benefit to that in some sense, in that people have busy lives, and if they want to make their comment but they've got to wait 4 hours, that's also somewhat problematic. There's a very careful balance that has to be struck there, and I would generally much rather weigh on the side of increased public participation whenever possible. But as long as we were reviewing this rule, I was okay with giving the chair some additional flexibility to be used very sparingly, and have that be a part of our culture, that it would be very sparing as well. Thank you.
And Councilmember Walsh, did you want to give a broader macro kind of explanation, or you feel comfortable that everyone has it based on the presentation? So
with just everything that we did?
Yeah.
Yeah. No, I wrote down just a few comments in that, there were 3 of us tasked with this. Initial scope was 6 primary areas, 4 minor. When we got started, there were 5 additional items, 3 added by staff, 2 by committee members, so 28 total areas of review. We did end up, first of all, moving our meetings to a public location, which we thought was great, and providing online access. We did have 2 members of the community who did end up joining us for one of the meetings, and so that was great as well. I think Tisha did a wonderful job just covering all of the pieces. I will add in there, along with the new business request process, there was a request from staff on council member use of staff time, and we did decline to pursue limits on use of staff time, believing that it's both our job to provide oversight, but also that staff already has the tools that they need to provide the limitations so that we are not taking over the staff time that we've already allocated via budget and pieces of that. The new business request item really came to us because it had been very rarely used in the previous council, and so we wanted to make sure that we reviewed and reduced barriers there, and I think we accomplished that both in creating a single touch item for minimal staff time and reducing the number of touches for larger new business request items and reducing the vote threshold from a majority to 3 council members. That ensures that something that is of interest but we don't have the full information on yet, if it's of interest to at least 3 council members, it can then go on to a planning calendar and a future agenda. It does not require the interest of a majority of the council in order to hear all of the information related to that. And then, as we've touched upon here, the confidentiality was really the only area where we had a minority opinion, and Councilmember Nichols has spoken to that a bit. But overall, it was a very successful committee, and I will just note that after we do the approval, the committee will be disbanded until there is any future use. And we have tended to do this every year or 2, just as items have come up over time.
Councilmember Joe.
Thank you. I'd like to thank Councilmember Walsh for her leadership during this process. The meetings were robust and the conversation was lively. Just one thing for council to keep in mind is these are rules that we're setting to kind of manage our own behavior and our conduct. However, always keep in mind that these rules may be suspended by a majority vote when situations arise that may be unusual or may require us to take extraordinary action or to address a specific situation. So while these are rules that we're agreeing to all abide by, they're by no means a straitjacket. They're just a guideline for us, and then we can suspend the rules if the situation should arise, and the flexibility is still there for us to address situations that I think our citizens would want us to address in either an emergency situation or a situation with some expediency required. So just please keep that in mind as we're approving these or considering these this evening. Thank you.
Councilmember Nichols.
Very briefly, at the high level, yes, I also want to thank our chair, thank my fellow committee members overall. I agree we had some good discussions, and also thank you to the staff. I appreciate this is a lot of work with many, many, many red lines to get through a very long document and condense those opinions, both from the council and the staff, into a good overall compromise. So thank you.
Can I ask, are we going to do a motion and then do amendments? As you said that you mentioned amendments, I guess, or?
Yes, yeah, you could do that. And also, as Wally shared, if there was the desire to add some more thoughtful language that might be difficult to come up with at this time, the item could also be postponed and language could be brought back at a subsequent meeting.
Got it. So, Councilmember Nichols.
Question, would it be advisable to accept, to strike one section with an understanding that that might be brought forward and otherwise vote on this as is? Or would it be better to bring it back in its entirety later?
Given the extensive nature of the revisions, it'd probably just be good to have one revised copy of this versus adopt this and then revise it in 2 weeks. So we could come back as early as the 18th of May. The city clerk won't be here. The next regular meeting after that is this June 1st. So I look to the chair of the committee if you have a preference.
Yeah, I think I am interested, and I think I've heard from several council members here on the dais that postponing is potentially a good idea. Were you just suggesting June 1st?
Just so we have adequate staff support, June 1st might be appropriate.
Yeah, if somebody is out of town that would provide staff support, I think, are perfectly fine to wait on that.
So we'd recommend June 1st then.
June 1st?
If you'd like to get it done tonight, I do have some language that I can offer for your
I
consideration.
think the administration would appreciate the council's generosity to give us some extra time.
Yeah, so do we need to make a motion to table or?
Or date certain?
There's not a motion pending right now, so I think it's fine if we're hearing that there's no objection to bring this item back at the June 1st meeting with some suggested revisions to the confidentiality section to talk about remedies to providing redacted information. If there's not an objection to that, we can just proceed.
Okay.
So I have a question for Clerk Gieser. First of all, I even though we don't have a motion in front of us, I want to thank you, Clerk Gieser. I did this last time we did this update, and your leadership on this is great. And the materials today, it was extremely well put together and extremely easy for me sitting on an airplane flying over Minnesota to understand as I was reading this. But I do have a question. If a council member wanted to consider potential amendment language on the 1st, would you like to know that now? Okay, so I will be suggesting on the 1st that we strike this new language and to set an overall maximum duration for the public comment period. If a maximum duration is set, efforts will be made to ensure there is equal opportunity for individuals to speak in support of and opposition to an issue. So I will be proposing that amendment on the 1st, just so as you know.
Okay. Okay.
We don't have to debate, we can't debate it now, but I wanted you to know that that's something I will be suggesting.
Okay, so this one's coming back on June 1st. So this will take us to committee and regional reports. And we're going to start with Council Member Boyd.
No report. I am not on any yet. So I think this is maybe next time.
You get the Brevity Award. Councilmember Adair.
I just have that tomorrow, May 5th at 6:30 is the Services, Safety, and Parks Committee meeting here, where the agenda items are equity goals and evaluation and an update on the potential park bond renewal.
All right, Councilmember Nichols.
Okay, I'd like to note that the Eastside Transportation Partnership will be meeting this Friday, May 8th at 8 a.m. I will be the sole representative for the city on what is normally a very well-represented committee by Issaquah. In that meeting, we will be discussing a letter of support for the 4-line with a vote scheduled. This is a letter that our vice chair has been working on with several other members of the committee to, as the title of the letter says, express the Eastside Transportation Partnership's broad support for the 4-line. We will also be receiving a report out on the FIFA Men's World Cup Transportation Panel, which I hope to get some good information back on what to expect, and we'll report out after that.
Can we submit the 4-line letter on purple cardstock?
I can try to make that motion and see how what the body's opinion is.
Okay, Councilmember Cho.
Thank you. Cascade Water Alliance will be holding a special meeting on tomorrow, May 5th. I believe you're attending, Mayor, concerning a personnel matter. The Mobility and Infrastructure Committee will be meeting on May 12th at 2:30. May 12th. We'll be looking at the amendments to the street standards for utility facilities and a transportation improvement update. In the monthly report for Cascade, I apologize for jumping around. They didn't indicate that report will be sent out to you, but in the outreach report, I would just note that they did report that 409 people visited the Cascade Water Alliance booth at the recent Issaquah Sustainability Fair on April 26th. So they are out in the community. They're out in Issaquah doing outreach for us. So just a note when you review that report, that should be coming to you in the next day or so. May 15th, we'll have a Chamber Board liaison meeting. Wally Bobkowitz and I will be attending that to keep the Chamber informed on what the city is doing. That concludes my report. Thank you.
Excellent. Councilmember Walsh.
Thank you. The Rules Ad Hoc met. I'm not going to give you a summary of that because we just did. The Planning Development Environment Committee, our meeting that was supposed to be tomorrow has been moved to May 19th as a change with SSP. Our agenda includes review of a goal and outcomes chart for housing work, plus our progress on code amendments thus far. East Side Fire and Rescue, still big topics. We meet May 14th. The agenda includes a presentation from Puget Sound Fire Authority, their chief. And so we are hearing because they went through the process of starting a regional fire authority 15 years ago, and they are just now adding the fire district around Maple Valley. They're also of similar size to Eastside Fire and Rescue, and when they include Maple Valley, they will butt up to us. So they will be one of a few potential fire authorities that we could, they could annex us as a potential. And then we will get the remainder of our presentation on possible funding models. So just to be very clear on an update, we are hoping to get feedback from the board at our June meeting about whether the idea of pursuing a planning committee to pursue the idea of a regional fire authority is something we want to go for. If so, the next step after that June meeting would be for the chief to contact all of the cities and districts and schedule a meeting with each of those councils, because in order to take that next official step to create a planning committee, we need to write a letter to all of the other municipalities and organizations that would potentially be merging together in order to invite them into a planning committee. That would also require us to appoint 3 elected officials from our organization into that. So if we are talking about 9 different organizations, that would potentially be a lovely planning committee of 27 members, which is not going to make anything easier. But that planning committee would potentially take a year to 2 years to do all of the work of what levy should we set, what fire benefit charge, what should be the governance model, who should be represented on the future board, all of those things. So, giving you a sense that this will potentially come back to council in September to ask for that letter to start a planning committee. I'm more than happy to brief anyone, talk to you all. I just know this is a big thing. Finally, the King County Affordable Housing Committee meets this Thursday at 3:30 p.m. virtually. The agenda includes revisions to our 2026 work plan, feedback on the 5-year action plan, and an update on our dashboard data.
Council President Martz.
So I have a question about the EFR. So when do we know when we're going to make a decision?
So the hope is that the Eastside Fire and Rescue Board of Directors will have all of the information they need by June to figure out if this is ready to go to the cities.
Okay.
If all of the 9 cities and fire districts agree and write a letter and appoint people, that would start a planning committee. The planning committee would then go through all of this full process, and that would potentially take a while. And so I think at this point we are looking at like a 2028 potential for an election.
So we as a body have an opportunity this summer to impact that trajectory, and then that's kind of it.
And then it would be up to the 3 elected officials from Issaquah to represent our views on that planning committee and come back and provide updates on what it is, maybe get feedback from council. I'm sure we can provide, regular updates and a sense of the big decision points so that we can make sure, much like you do for PIC, if there's a decision coming up, we want to make sure that council agrees with those ideas and can then bring that back to the planning committee.
So it would be, essentially the train would leave the station this summer.
So the train would potentially leave the station on creating a planning committee. A planning committee at any point can be dissolved by any of the members by writing a letter in.
Any of the members. So it has to be a unanimous decision.
I believe any of the members can choose to leave, but that would bring in all these questions about how do we fund Eastside Fire and Rescue if 8 of the members were to continue with a regional fire authority and 1 decided not to. That will be also a topic of conversation amongst the planning committee, because we would need to also determine how someone leaves a regional fire authority once it was created. There are a lot of decision points and conversations. I guess what I would say from a starting point is Eastside Fire and Rescue is way ahead of the times in that we created a regional fire organization before such a thing existed at the state level. And so this regional fire authority is something that the state created because there was a need for regionalization here, and it gave us some funding levers that we cannot currently take advantage of. But it does come with a lot of decision making.
I'm just trying to understand where the gates are.
Yeah.
Like, I realize it's a complicated decision and we need a lot more data and all that kind of stuff. I'm just trying to understand where the decision points are.
Yeah.
Where we get to say yes or no, understanding that a no can get complicated if we get very far down the process.
Yeah, and I will bring that feedback back to the chief in that we need to be very clear when he is doing those presentations in September where the gates are and what the opportunities of each of our organizations is to provide feedback throughout the process.
Thank you, I appreciate that.
Yeah.
Deputy President Jang.
Great. Okay, 2 updates for me. So the King County Flood Control District Advisory Committee had our first meeting of the year on Friday, April 24th. We discussed the flood control district budgets and the process for projects to move from proposed to prioritized to funded to implementation. Notably, there is an additional $40 million in spending allocated to help with recovery from the major floods that happened in December 2025. And also, there's kind of a discussion on just budgeting for the flood control district in general. The flood control district is quite underfunded relative to the need. Basically, they're like, if we implemented all the projects that people have applied for, we would have a balance of negative $200 million. And I mean, just given where we're trending with the climate, I think the need for that will continue to increase. So will be interesting to see how that goes. The other very interesting meeting that I attended that day was the King County Regional Homelessness Authority Governing Board meeting. We met in person at the Seattle Library, and we had to move to a different room to have space for the members of the media that were there with us, which was very interesting. So as you may have heard, we reviewed the results of a forensic audit. An accountant from Clark Newber, which is an accounting firm based out of Bellevue, spoke with us. You may have read about this in the news. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out to me directly. But basically, the main action that was taken in that meeting was creating a finance committee to provide oversight, as well as institute a hiring freeze unless specific exemptions are granted by the finance committee. I will be the representative from Sound Cities Association on this finance committee, along with 2 representatives from Seattle, 2 representatives from King County, and 1 lived experience representative. So more to come on that. That concludes my report.
Council President Martins.
How can I follow that? There is an upcoming SCA PIC, Sound Cities Association Public Issues Committee meeting Wednesday, May 13th. It's relatively juicy, not that juicy, but we're going to have a discussion on a potential affordable housing regional initiative. We're going to, so a start point, but no action anticipated. There is an action anticipated on the 2027 proposed sewer rate response letter. There have been a number of potential amendments, and so I have just forwarded you all. I don't think you were necessarily on the original note from, I think it was Laura Belmont, but please take a look. There's no guarantee that all those amendments will be supported by PIC, but if you have strong feelings one way or the other, please let me know before the 13th, because that is the second touch on this issue. So this is when we will make a recommendation to the full board, which I'm on, but that occurs after the next full council meeting. So I will have information at the next regular council meeting on how that goes and what's going to be going to the board. There's also potential action on a Sound Transit Enterprise Initiative. I don't know anything about that yet, but that's another one of those two-touch processes. So I'll have more information on that after the meeting. This concludes my report.
Okay. As you heard from Councilmember Joe, Cascade Water Alliance will have a meeting. We will choose a new executive director at tomorrow's meeting, and so I will share the name of that individual at May 18th. Our next council meeting, I will also share it by email after the selection is public. I am confident there's good plan for leadership for Cascade Water going forward. In terms of community events coming up, the Issaquah Rotary has their Grape Escape at Pickering Barn. That's 5:30 this Wednesday. It is a great fundraiser. All the money they raise goes into the scholarships for various Issaquah School District high school students. The Sound Transit Board meeting is this Thursday at May 7th. We are encouraging our amazing community who has been so active and engaged in this process this entire year to meet outside of City Hall here at 9 a.m. The bus leaves at 9:11, I think. And for those who want to just drive down, they can also just meet downtown in Seattle at the building where the executive board meets. And the final, we do expect the Sound Transit overall board to take action right now. We're told of the May 28th meeting. So I think the understanding is that there will be a executive from Chair Summers' proposal on Thursday morning, right before this meeting starts at 10:30. And so we will digest that proposal when it comes out. And at this point in time, that's when we'll find out if Issaquah is on the ST3 light rail map or if our plans have been changed. Issaquah Farmers Market, first kickoff event was last Saturday. Over 3,700 shoppers attended. And it will be every Saturday from now through September 26th. So coming out to Pickering Barn, and it's an amazing event. Down home 4th of July Issaquah Community Mosaic Creation. So there's 2 upcoming opportunities to join local artist Cheryl Smith to create a beautiful mosaic piece to celebrate America's 250th anniversary. First will be Saturday, May 9th from 5 to 8 p.m. along Front Street in Old Town in conjunction with the Issaquah Walk and Music Stroll. And then there'll be a second one on Saturday, May 23rd at the Farmers Market. Participants will have a chance to engage in a collaborative artwork to become part of the City of Issaquah's permanent public art collection. And that should be fun. The Issaquah Annual Community Awards is going to be next Thursday evening, May 14th, from 5:30 to 8 o'clock at the Fairfield Inn. And that is coming up next week. In terms of, obviously, the ALPR discussion has been in front of this council this year. I think just so folks have an update of where we're at right now is I think Councilmember Walsh and Councilmember Nichols will meet with Dale Markey Cripp when she is back from vacation on May 11th. I think the sense I've gotten from the council is to pursue pass in the space where you have a less likelihood of potential data breaches, where you have a local server where if you are using any sort of camera technology, it's being stored on a local server. I think the sense is that Councilmember Walsh and Nichols will give Dale guidance in this space, which then she can take that guidance and see what's available on the open market and then come back to council with potential options that could be pursued in June. And so but Dale is on vacation this entire week. With that concludes the mayor's report. We will now go to good of the order, and I want to make sure at some point during good of the order, we try to nail down a July meeting time. So let's go to Council President Martz first, followed by Councilmember Walsh.
Yeah, I just want to say thank you to City Attorney Turpin for the Public Records and Open Public Meetings Act training this evening. It's dry but important material, and it's also herding cats. And it's also, I'm always struck how impressed I am that so many council members get their questions in early. I'm not like that. And so to the extent that staff fields all my ad hoc questions that come up, it was really important this evening. And thank you so much, because it really did then inform the conversation that we had about rules of procedure. So it was deeply appreciated. Thank you.
I can share at the AWC Legislative Affairs Committee last Friday, the most common agreement on cities was we need to have some fix on the public records side. I think it definitely came up that I think there's a lot of people building AI models that'll send requests to cities which are very time consuming and very burdensome. And so I think there is kind of a sense that going into the 27th legislative session, we might have to come up with some sort of proposal that acknowledges the importance of the public knowing what we're doing, but doesn't let people, from elsewhere in the country who are just trying to build AI functionality just overwhelm our public records departments. Councilmember Walsh.
Yeah, I just want to provide just a little bit of clarity on the ALPR portion that you had mentioned. Councilmember Nichols and I think, are very willing to talk to Dale Markey Crimp about that, but I don't think there was necessarily agreement among council that we are looking for a particular solution that provides more limitations. I'm happy to look for it, but I don't want the public information out there suggesting that we've had any conversations or that there's a sense of agreement, more that we heard the public that they want to make sure that whatever, if we do something, that they have transparent information on it. So I just want to make sure there is nothing out there suggesting that we already know where we are going with something, or that we have a sense of where we would like to go.
Okay, Councilmember Nichols.
Yeah, I'd like to second that. And I also think that other things that, of course, will be on the table and that always are on the table will be the adoption by council of various ordinances that could put guardrails of varying degrees on anything that might be pursued. So that's something that I think the public should also be aware of, is always a possibility, and something that we could investigate, not simply looking at systems, but also what are guardrails that would come back to council that could, for example, take the form of an ordinance.
Any other good of the order before I go through my good of the order items? Okay. The upcoming council meetings, this Saturday, May 9th, we have a city council retreat, Gibson Hall, 9 a.m. to 2 p.m. Topics are economic development plan update, 2026 citywide work plan, 2025 performance measures, potential park bond renewal, 27-28 budget planning. That is, we then have the committee of the whole on May 11th, next Monday, with anticipated agenda items of the Issaquah Climate Action Plan, the Issaquah Police Department Congressional Community Appropriations Grant. Before the council meeting on May 18th, we will have council photos taken outside Memorial Field before the meeting, and also that evening at 6:30 p.m. we'll have a reception right here in council chambers for Councilmember Barb Michelle and our retiring Police Chief Schwan. Councilmember Boyd, I see you with a question.
All right, council photos are on the 11th or the 18th?
Oh, they're on the 11th.
Oh, okay.
Sorry. Yes.
Just checking.
Good fact check, Councilmember Boyd. Well played. And the regular, I think we may have a resolution on self-permitting agreement with Sound Transit. It would just be a resolution. I think the nuances of how that plays out is through some sort of interlocal agreement, which is actually fairly complicated, but I think we'll see how things go on May 7th. But if things on May 7th are fairly positive, then I think we may bring forward a resolution just to kind of indicate that the city's open-minded to this process. And with that, I hope people brought their calendars, because I think our goal, appreciating that summer's in Seattle, summer weekends are very finite, and so I think our suggestion is to shift the July financial planning update to an evening in the second half of July between 5 p.m. and kind of 8 or 8:30 p.m. sort of thing. And I think we are looking at potential dates. So Tisha, you can help me out here. We have, I think Thursday, July 23rd was one option. And I think another option, correct me if I'm wrong, is I don't think there is any meeting on Monday, July 27th right now. So I think Monday, because the one downside of the meeting, if we do it on Thursday, July 23rd, was that there is a lot of other meetings in the evening that week already. If we did it on Monday, July 27th, we don't think there's really another council meeting in the evening that entire week. Is that correct? And so I just don't know if folks are available on Monday, July 27th, 5 p.m. to potentially do our kind of, Councilmember Walsh.
I will just note that I have a Regional Coalition for Housing Committee of Electeds meeting on that Thursday, the 23rd, from 5 to 7 p.m. So I would prefer not to have to miss one of only 4 meetings.
Yeah. But Monday, the 27th for you is open. We're saying thumbs up on Monday, July 27th at 5 p.m. So we're gonna.
I have an appointment on my calendar that just says appointment at 3 o'clock, so.
But at 3 o'clock.
I'm sure it'll be fine. That's great.
That's a 3 o'clock appointment. This is 5 o'clock. Your other appointment, you'll have to be highly efficient. Okay, so why don't folks put a hold on that? We will get back to you with some sort of, Councilmember Boyd.
Sorry, you said, like, it starts at 5, or we're doing like a normal council time, like 7?
It starts at 5. I think the thought is sometimes it's 3 hours. It can stretch to 3.5 or 4 hours. And so I think if we start at 5, that makes sure we're out of here at a more reasonable time. But if there is a request to move back to a later start time,
Would you
make it now.
entertain 5:30?
We can entertain 5:30. I'm saying nods from the council. 5:30.
Thank you.
Okay. So we will pencil in kind of 5:30 tonight, Councilmember Walsh.
Can I just ask that the clerk send us out a hold for our calendars? Okay, thank you.
Yes, we will do that. There is no executive session this evening, and saying no further business before this council, we are adjourned at 10:13.